Okay, so originally I recorded this and I did it over the course of a few days where I was like explaining everything and then going back and cutting up the audio and just editing a lot, and it just got super choppy. I was not a fan of that. So I'm re-recording it and I'm going to do it in one continuous take. So you might see me stop and drink some water. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We're just going to go for it. Um, but basically, this is ethics as they would normally be presented, but instead we're going to focus on them from like the criminal justice lens because our job does make ethics a little bit different. Just one example, and there will be a lot through the slideshow, but is confidentiality, right? Like we have to disclose a client's violation to a probation officer. That's specific to like sex offense treatment. Maybe, I guess that's all I'm familiar with, but um, just those kind of things. They make ethics different. And so we still have the same code, but we kind of have like an extra code that we have to follow. So this is kind of what that will be about. I do want to say a couple of things. So one, there will be a slide where you might want your DSM handy. You could obviously pause this when you get there, but it's about adjustment disorder. So if you want to have that ready, you can, just so you know. And then I also want to say that all the images on these slides, or I think all but two, the images are created by AI, specifically ChatGPT, but everything else was like ethically sourced information, like the actual information, educational material, all of that. Don't let the images fool you. Those were ethically sourced. Like I did all the research and everything. So I know sometimes we see AI and then it's just like kind of discredited, but I promise that that is not the case. So um, let's get started. So these are our learning objectives. So the idea is the NASW, or excuse me, Doppel, wants to know basically like what you're learning from this. And so by the end of this, you'll be taking a test. Basically, I think it's 35 questions, and it will test you on these topics. It's the idea is because you're doing this virtually, they want to make sure that you were paying attention. So I will say that just to make sure it's like kind of up to standard, a lot of the information for like that would apply to the test questions would be found in like this audio from me, not in the slides themselves. And then also, I just noticed that I'm at the bottom corner here on the slide, so I'm covering part of it up. Um, I'll be honest, I'll try to change that. So if I am able to change it after I'm done recording, you'll think I'm insane because I'll have moved it to the other side, but we'll see what happens. If it is covering it up, I am more than happy to provide my slides without um, like audio or video on top of them, just so that people have them. So if that makes it easier, just that'll be an option. So let's get started, right? So the biggest thing is why do we even need a code of ethics? Um, I would say the primary reason is it just kind of reminds us like why we got into this in the first place. So the reason I chose an image of a girl like graduating is when you finished school, what were like your dreams? Why did you get into this? Like we spent a lot of time and money getting these degrees. Why did you do that? I would guess that your answer is like to the tune of I want to help people, right? That's my thing. I want to help people. So just take a second and like kind of think back. What was your mission? What was the reason you did this kind of back then? And if it was something like I want to help people, then you're kind of in the majority, I would say. And it aligns then with the social work mission, which is on this slide. You can read it yourself. But just to kind of call attention to a couple specific lines in the social work mission, helping meet the basic human needs of all people. That would be daunting if we were alone, right? Helping meet the basic needs of all people would be incredibly difficult. I just realized I'm kind of out of frame. Sorry, I'm doing my best here. I think we're good. Um, but you can do your little corner, right? Like you can help who you're helping, and I'll help who I'm helping, and they'll help who they're helping. And like together, we're all helping a lot of people. So that, why do we need the code of ethics? It's kind of to remind us of why we do this so that we can make the largest impact possible. And then that impact is kind of assumed to be specifically with people who are like vulnerable or in some way oppressed. And that's harder, I would say, with people on the registry, or even like substance users who are kind of viewed as like moral failures. People don't really view them as vulnerable as much as they view them as like criminal. So it complicates things, which we'll get into a lot as we keep going. But okay, so we're trying to pay attention to the needs and empowerment of people who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. So think of some of your clients. How many of them does that apply to? I would guess probably a lot of them. Sorry, I've really never done this. I'm like not, I'm nervous, but it's fine. I'm just gonna keep going. So yeah, like I said, with forensic populations, the vulnerability factor is, I don't know, the question kind of becomes like, have they oppressed themselves? Um, Kind of, right? Like sort of. They, take like a person of color, for example, who obviously is oppressed systematically. Um, they haven't done that to themselves, right? Like they are a product of their skin color, which is obviously not a choice they made. They're a product of their genetics and all of these kind of things. And so when you try to defend those populations, people are usually on board. Like people do usually want to help those populations, and you don't really get much pushback. But if any of you have ever told people like, yeah, I'm a therapist for sex offenders, there's a lot of pushback. There's like a lot where people, I've been called some names. I've been told that I'm probably a sex offender myself because it's the only way I would want to help those people. My husband has like lost friends to what I do for a living. And so people really like, they don't view them as vulnerable or oppressed. They view them as, criminal moral failures. And so it changes the game, of like this mission. And part of that mission becomes helping them adjust to this life instead of helping them like overcome it, which I'll get to that also later. Um, and then this last part of the mission, is that we have a quote dual focus on individual well-being in social context and the well-being of society. So part of our job is not only to help the client, but also to make sure that in doing so we're focused on the well-being of society. And as you can imagine, when we're working with these like criminal moral failures, forensic populations, it's a little harder. You got to make sure that you're really balancing that. Whereas, like, if you're working with someone, for example, who has like severe depression and no criminal history, um, that person's not much of a danger to society, right? When you're working with people who have had like full contact offenses, especially like multiple contact offense, I mean, like you're talking about people who are dangerous, and so the well-being of society is altered, and you have to have like more of a focus on that and less of a focus on the fact that they are like a vulnerable person. So that's kind of the first why. The NASW lists 6 reasons, and I'll talk about all of them. But basically, if the mission, if helping people who are vulnerable is your destination in this, then ethics would be your compass. So we have it because it helps us know, what to do in any given situation, because there's not like a GPS, right? There's not like a for sure do this. And so it's just, the code is meant to help us make decisions so that we can work toward that mission. So next slide. I'm gonna get a little more in frame. This camera's backwards, so here we go. Okay, I want to do kind of an activity on this one. It's the presentation needs to be interactive, for credit. So little activity. We're talking in this case about like your professional values versus your personal values, right? So some people like their religion would be a personal value, but you don't want to bring your religion into the clinic. Your religion is not relevant to a client's treatment, right? So excuse me. So these are going to be, I'm going to list 4 different things and their values a person might have, or like beliefs that a person might have, and just say like to yourself, really, like, is this a social value or is this a personal value, excuse me, a social value or a professional value? So the first one is, I don't like working with clients whose charges involve a child. Is that personal or professional? It's personal. you may not like it, right? And I'll be honest and say, like, there have been some things that I've had to read about or hear about from a client, that are kind of hard, that are hard to just sit with. But it's my job to be there with the client, not my job to judge the client for what they've done. So that's kind of the big thing of putting your personal values off to the side so you can be with the client. Number two, I treat all of my clients with the same dignity and respect, regardless of their offense. Is that because of a personal value or a professional value? I treat all of my clients with the same dignity and respect, regardless of their offense. That's a professional value, obviously. It's something that you're doing in your clinic that you make sure is just applying to everyone, because it's not something that you're judging based off of, or like only caring about the people whose values align with yours. Um, this one's fun. I don't believe that the courts should mandate treatment. Um, I guess give you a second to decide on your answer, but um, the answer would be it's a social or personal value. I don't believe that the courts should mandate treatment, but I also do think that you sort of have a professional obligation to be kind of changing policy in favor of your client's ability to overcome their vulnerabilities. And so, mandated treatment, I think, does create vulnerabilities for some clients, especially clients who like are self-pay and don't have a job or something. There are also some clients who a couple months of treatment might be fine. Like they might not even need that. They're like low enough risk, or they got everything they needed in prison. And so a mandated treatment plan is sort of a waste for them. Hopefully you're able to kind of make it not a waste for them. That would be the ideal goal here. But whether you believe the courts should mandate treatment or not, and whether you believe your client needs treatment or not, if the courts said they need it, you have to do it. You don't have a choice. So it is a personal value that you have to be able to put to the side. Last one, when providing mandated treatment, I make sure that my clients understand the limits of confidentiality. When providing mandated treatment, I make sure that my clients understand the limits of confidentiality. That one's professional, right? That's like you're following something from the code of ethics, which is confidentiality obviously is part of it, and then also informed consent is part of that, which again we'll talk about like down the line in this presentation. But that's a professional value. That's you, like, regardless of whether you think mandated treatment should be happening or whether you think this client needs mandated treatment, they still need the exact same treatment as everybody else, and part of that is informed consent and confidentiality. Okay, so this is the number 2 of the 6 that the NASW includes of why we need a code of ethics. You can read it there on your slide. But the biggest thing is just that it gives us standards for our self-conduct. So we need to have like decently aligned standards with all of our colleagues so that like we all kind of know what to expect from each other, and also so that the clients know what to expect. That's definitely a factor. So making sure that you're following the same kind of patterns, the best way to do that is to make sure everybody has sort of a handbook to do that with. So give you a second to keep reading that just in case. Oh, sorry. Those are the 4 answers: social, professional, but we already covered that. Okay. So number 3, why do we need a code of ethics? This one has another example on it. So this is a case where it does get a little bit murky between like normal therapy and forensic therapy. So here's an example of like a potentially conflicting situation. So the client is thinking about drinking with friends. You do a double behavior chain. They agree that they shouldn't, but they leave saying that they're still not sure whether they will. So it's possible this client might be leaving and drinking even though they know that they shouldn't, right? They hint at the potential that they already bought it. So you're like, that guy might have booze at home already, but he doesn't actually say that. So do you tell the PO? Like if you have pretty good reason to suspect that he's going to violate his probation tonight, but no actual proof or admission that he's going to, and he hasn't yet, even if he did admit to it, do you tell the PO? And I'll just let you, I guess, think about that for a second. Um, the point here is like the answer is not always clear. So, by using like kind of a set of, codified do's and don'ts, the answer becomes a little more clear. Like it's not going to be black and white still, but it's a little more clear. Um, in this case, for example, the answer would be to respect confidentiality because they haven't broken a probation rule yet. And I think sometimes we want to like stop our clients from violating, like, hey, don't do that, you're doing so well, like don't let yourself end up in that situation. But at the end of the day, and we'll talk about this in a later slide also, but at the end of the day, it's not our job to it's not our job to make good decisions for our clients. It's our job to help clients kind of overcome their bad decisions and pursue their own lives in a way that is their preference. And sometimes that means consequences. Sometimes their preference is the thing that gets them in trouble. And it's not our job to report that as far as like our requirements with APNP. It is not our job to report that until it actually does happen or you are violating what little confidentiality the client has left. Um, the whole point of this one, so the third reason we need a code of ethics is to just help us like solve kind of these dilemma type problems. Next slide. Uh-oh. Wait. Okay, next slide. Number 4, why do we need a code of ethics? So this one, the code provides ethical standards to which the general public can hold the social work profession accountable. This one I think I might argue is like, to me at least, the most important one. Because really what this boils down to is like, why do we need a code of ethics? Because we can be sued if we aren't following the rules. And I kind of think that we should be. I think that if we're not upholding the ethical code, which, exists for a reason, we should probably have some kind of consequence for that. Like we are in a position with a lot of power, and we need to make sure that we're not taking advantage of that position. Consider like, with a forensic client, I would say that 9 times out of 10, the PO is likely to trust your word over theirs. Like if it's a, clinical social worker's word versus a convicted sex offender's word, I think most people would believe the clinician. And because of that, we need to only be acting ethically. Like we shouldn't be taking advantage of that position. When we got these licenses, like we agreed to live by this code. And the people who rely on us, like our clients and our colleagues, they need to be able to trust that we are um, adequately upholding this code. And again, like that is especially true with forensic populations because they are so vulnerable and at risk. It's also true with forensic populations because if we're doing something wrong, it violates that mission of keeping the public safe, right? So if we're working with sex offenders and we, I don't know, commit some kind of like time fraud or something where they're like not getting the treatment that they need, and we maybe say that they are, but they're not, they could go out and commit another offense. Like it can get kind of serious with these populations. To be clear, it's not any less of a problem with other types of populations. Like I always say, I'm not working with depressed housewives. Like I'm working with people who can legitimately cause like some damage in society. But even the depressed housewife, right, deserves to have the same level of ethical standing from their clinician, because at the end of the day, like they are trusting you to do the job that they're paying you to do, and to help you, or sorry, and to help them kind of overcome whatever they're going through. So where does their line start? There's the client's. Where does the client's line start and ours end? Um, if we're doing like a garbo job at being their therapist, if we're not like, doing our best and trying to get it right, and sometimes maybe making mistakes, but like owning those mistakes, like trying to get it right and doing our best to hit that mark as often as possible and own it when we don't, um, how can they expect to improve if we're not doing that stuff? If we're just being a shit garbo therapist, the client and society who is relying on us cannot improve. Like at the end of the day, they make their own decisions. At the end of the day, the client gets to decide whether they're going to reoffend, um, or commit another crime or, violation or whatever. But it is our job to teach them the skills that kind of prevent them or at least help them not do that. And if we're not teaching them those skills, then we are kind of, you know, somewhat culpable for decisions that they make. Like at the end of the day, they're the one who has the consequences and the one that made the decision. But we do kind of owe it to our clients, I think, to do it as correctly as possible, as often as possible. And that part I think is really hard because you're going to have days where I don't know, I'll use a personal example like your kid ran away and you're freaking out and life's getting really hard, but you still need to show up for your clients. You have to kind of make the decision to put all of that compartmentally to the side and just be with the client. And we'll talk about like when you can't do that. That's in a later slide, but yeah, a big part of this is society being able to hold us accountable so that we're kind of forced to do the best job that we can. Number 5. So again, you can just read this on the slide, but another reason we need a code of ethics. It kind of ensures that like new clinicians have a good, I don't know, a good aim for a compass, right? A good direction to go in. And that it's going to be the same direction as everyone else. So as it says here, socializes practitioners who are new to the field. It also, though, ensures that people who have been doing this for a while, assuming they're following the ethical code, are continuously growing and improving. And I think that that's why we have to do CEUs, right? That's why you have to listen to me drone on for the next 3 hours, is that people who have been doing this still need either the refresher or the update when information changes. And information changes kind of regularly, like social work, psychology, those kind of like humanist types of sciences. They're relatively new comparatively, and so they do change. They change kind of a lot, and it's just important to be able to change with them. So following the code of ethics is kind of what accomplishes that. Um, let's see. Sorry, I'm kind of reading my notes on here. Oh, okay. Self-care is another thing that this talks about, and I actually have a different slide on, I believe it's on integrity, that talks about self-care. So I'll like get a little more into it then. But one of the things with the code of ethics and as it relates to like keeping yourself educated, keeping yourself I don't know, going the right direction is self-care. You can't pour from an empty cup. And I think the code of ethics actually acknowledges that, that you owe it to your clients to be the best version of a therapist you can be for them. And part of doing that is keeping up on your self-care, which we'll talk about more during the integrity slide. So I can't believe I have to talk for 3 hours. I also am just going to like continuously end up out of frame apparently. Um, sorry, I've really never done this, and this is just as hard as I thought it would be. So, um, okay. Next slide. So the 6th reason why we need a code of ethics. This one is like it's kind of about consequences. So if you're not following the code of ethics, how does it say it here? Let's see, social workers are required to cooperate in its implementation, participate in the National Association of Social Workers adjudication proceedings, and abide by disciplinary rulings or sanctions. It tells you what's wrong and expects you to not do those things. And it also tells you what can happen if you do those things. To some degree, I will say none of ethics, there are a couple things in ethics that are black and white. Most of ethics is like a bunch of gray areas, but also most of ethics is ensuring that you're acting in good faith, that you are making decisions that are like defensible, that you're talking to people about your decisions, making sure that if you don't hit the mark that you're reporting yourself. Like it needs to be clear that you're acting in good faith, like pretty much all the time. Like again, you have people under your care, like you wouldn't want a doctor who's like just consequence free and can do whatever they want. obviously you would not want to go to that doctor. And so, no one would want to go to a therapist that's allowed to just do whatever they want without consequences. They would want to go to a therapist whose decisions are required to be defensible, lest they want pretty serious consequences. Um, I can't off the top of my head, I'm gonna drop the F bomb. Um, the only like black and white one I remember from school is they would always say, "What's the only black and white rule?" And I would say, "Don't fuck your clients." And that is a pretty hardcore black and white. Like there's no, you don't do that. You don't. You're not even friends with them. You're definitely not more than friends with them. And if you're even trying to be friends with them, like you are putting them at risk. So my point with this though is like it's not black and white for the most part. But that is, and that one will have disciplinary rulings and sanctions, as will kind of a lot of other things if you're not being, reasonable and defensible with your actions. So you will have consequences if you mess up and don't report it yourself and don't like respond appropriately to your mistake, basically. Next slide. Okay, so why do we need a code of ethics? Kind of to sum that all up, right? It's something that it helps us know like why we're doing this. That was the first one. It reminds us like I want to help people and here's who I want to help. And then it tells us how to conduct ourselves. So I want to help people. Here's who I want to help. And here's how I'm going to do it, or how I'm going to act while I do it, I guess. It helps us solve internal conflicts. So here's who I want to help, here's how I want to help them, how I want to conduct myself while I help them. And if there is like a question, here's something I can turn to like get an idea of what the right move is here. I don't want to read all 6 of these at you. That's so incredibly lame. But it's about community safety. It's about making sure the direction that you're heading is one that's like positive, reasonable, and then keeping us out of trouble, like making sure that everything you're doing is defensible, transparent. We'll talk more about that when we talk about like fraud. But just making sure that you're acting appropriately as a clinician at all times. Oopsie, I didn't mean to go to the next slide already, but here we are. Actually, I can't go back a slide. So we're on number 10. This is the right slide. Okay. So we're going to talk about the values, the ethical code values. But before doing so, I kind of a pre-test. Let's see what you know already. You can just, I guess you can either write it down if you want to grab a piece of paper while I'm rambling really quick, or if you just want to kind of do it mentally, that's totally fine. But it's just going to be like a yes or no. Are you acting ethically in this situation? I think it's actually unethically. Are you acting unethically in this situation? So first one, and I'll kind of give you a second to think about it, is you have a new client and you clearly explain confidentiality at intake, answer all of their questions, and document the discussion. So new client, totally explain everything, answer any questions they have, and document the conversation. Are you acting unethically? No, you're not. You are, as we said earlier, like you're doing informed consent with the client. I keep moving and I'm just going to end up off screen at some point. You're doing informed consent with the client. You're answering all of their questions, and then you're theoretically, according to this, doing appropriate documentation. So that one's good. So number 2, similar, okay, you have a new client. And their PO is one who does like a really good job at explaining everything to the client. So you have good reason to believe that they already know everything that's going to happen here. So you skip some of the discussion. You do ask if they have any questions, but they say no. You still document the discussion. So the only real difference here is in the first one, you explained everything and then asked if they had questions. In this one, you assumed they knew and then asked if they had questions. So in that case, are you acting unethically? Yes, you are, because you're not the one explaining it. To give this kind of like a corollary with treatment, when we have a sex offense client who wants to have a new supervisor for their case, we make them bring the supervisor in and do like a full disclosure of their offense and any other deviant history with the prospective supervisor. And we do that even if it's like, yeah, they know about my offense. They went through the whole court case with me and they did this and they did that. And of course they know everything. Um, we can believe them. And I would say most of the time, if they tell us that, they are telling the truth. But we need to be like 100% sure, right? Like we need to know that their, we'll say spouse knows. And the only way to know for sure that the spouse knows is to have them come in and personally watch that disclosure happen. Then you know for sure. Same thing with this. The only way to know for sure that this client understands, in this case, the limitations of confidentiality is to have that discussion with them. Even if the PO probably told them, you can have the discussion and you can say, your PO probably told you all of this already because I know that that guy's really good at it. But just to make sure it's clear, I just want to make sure I say it too. And they're gonna say, okay. Like they're not gonna be like, no, please don't tell me. So number 3, um, you run into a colleague in the hallway, and you know that they have a client who's similar to yours, that you have someone you're working with and they've worked with someone similar. And you're kind of struggling with your client. So you're like, they'll probably know like what to do here because they had that one guy. So you begin talking to the colleague, explaining some of the client's characteristics. We'll say like, I don't know, they keep smoking weed even though they, keep repeatedly getting told to stop. I don't know. Another client in the lobby overhears you and just based on what you're saying is able to piece together who you're talking about. But you didn't say their name. You weren't disclosing personal information outside of just discussing their case. Is that unethical when you didn't actually use any personal information? Is it unethical? Yes, it is. Because the person in the lobby can put together, if they're able to put together who it is, you use too much information. You use too much identifying information by virtue of the fact that they were able to put it together. Later, I might talk about it if I remember on a different slide, but I guess I could just say it right now. Your client's criminal history sort of acts as like a fingerprint. If you have a client, especially if they have like a really specific type of case or if they have like a detailed criminal history, vocally discussing their criminal history could be enough for like, people in the lobby to put it together, especially if they were like in prison together. They're going to know this kind of stuff. And so you really have to be careful where you're discussing information and what information you're discussing when you do. There is more to say about confidentiality, which is on a different slide, but that's not the point of this slide. So, number 4, you end early because you have a family emergency. So something comes up, you have a family emergency, you end early. When the dust settles from the family emergency, you realize that you don't remember what time you ended the session, but it was pretty close to the full session. So you just put it in as like an hour, like you just put it as 60 minutes because it was probably like 53. And so what's the difference? I don't know the exact time. I'll just put it in. So estimating your time would be what I would describe this as. So if you estimate your time, are you acting unethically? Yes, you are. The reason being that you are technically committing fraud. I would say it's like a lower level of fraud, but it's still on the fraud spectrum because you're putting in the time, even though it's potentially not correct. One might ask themselves like, well, it was a family emergency. Like I didn't think to write down the time. Something big happened and I had to rush out immediately. What do you want from me? We just want you to document it. That's it. We just want you to like somewhere on the session note you can put like just put to the hour and then in the there's like always going to be a notes spot on your session notes, or there should be. If you don't have that, talk to your admin. But a spot where you can just put like this session ended somewhere between 3:52 and 4 o'clock. I'm just not sure exactly what time because I had a family emergency. Just put that. Just put what happened. It's not fraud if you explain. So is that unethical not to? Yes. Is it unethical that you didn't know what time it ended? No. The unethical part is the estimation in this case. Okay, last one. You receive a court subpoena for a client who has a history of substance use. You respond to the court and refuse to provide this information. So you have a subpoena for a client who has a history of substance use, and you respond refusing to provide this information. Have you acted unethically? No. And I think it sounds to most people, or to people maybe who aren't familiar with the Part 2 law, which I'll explain later, it does sound like it would be unethical to say no to a subpoena. But there actually are situations where you can say no to a subpoena, specifically with substance use clients, but we'll get to that more when we talk about like HIPAA. But keep in mind, there are situations where a subpoena is not valid. And actually, I would say arguably, and there is like a law that I cite, you could not necessarily reject, but like my brain stopped. You could like refuse on most subpoenas. The judge might tell you to kick rocks and make you do it anyways, but you can attempt to refuse most subpoenas. So, okay. You would get 20% for each question. I don't know how many you got right. You're the only person who knows that, but hopefully you already knew most of this. If you didn't, you're just learning something new, and that's okay. If you did and you got a pretty good score here, you actually still have to watch this whole slideshow. So sorry about that. Okay, what are the ethical values? That's the next thing we're going to talk about. So you've committed to being the best therapist that you can be. So let's talk about the ethical values that are set out by the NASW. That's the National Association of Social Workers, which I'll probably just say NASW moving forward because it's a hard one to spit out. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about each of these values from two different perspectives. The first just being like, as a therapist, what is the value? What does it mean to you as a therapist? And then the second one is going to be, what does this mean as a therapist in the forensic field? Because that, I think, actually, for most of the people watching this, theoretically means a lot more than just general therapy. And to be very clear, if you're in normal therapy, the second half, the forensic stuff, does not apply to you. But if you're in forensic therapy, both halves, the normal and the forensic values, apply to you. So keeping in mind that it's not, okay, well, I have a social work, or I'm a social worker with forensic clients, so these are my values. No. It's I'm a social worker, so these are my values, and I work with forensic clients, and so these are also my values. So let's start with service, but there are 6. We'll go through all 6 of them. Okay, the first one, ethical principle of service. The ethical principle listed as social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. So here's the deal. Like the NASW formally acknowledges that at the end of the day, your job is to help people. Like that's it. Actually, it's like referenced kind of all over the place in the Handbook of Ethics, that the goal is to help people. So I'm just going to say this kind of bluntly. If you don't want to help people, you're in the wrong field, because it like very literally says it's the primary goal. I do worry, this isn't about any of my like current colleagues or coworkers. It's just something I worry about, that people get into therapy and any kind of social work really because they know that it's like an upper hand type of relationship. And then particularly with forensic clients, you have even more of an upper hand, and I worry that people get into it so they can punish. And if that's what you're doing, go be a cop. Go be a CO in a prison or something else, but not a therapist, because they're trusting you to help them, and that would not be helping them. So a few things that it says on here. Social workers elevate service to others above self-interest. You, this is so complicated, right? Because self-care matters, and taking care of, your own stuff in your life matters. So how do you put like service to others above your own self-interest? It does actually encourage some different ways to do that. I would say one of them is pro bono services. But it's not like, do for your clients so much that you end up, destitute or something. But doing enough for your clients that you can say like, I am helping them even at my own detriment when it's necessary. A good example being, again, like my daughter ran away. I talked about this is a long time ago, but my daughter ran away, and I was in like a pretty bad headspace. But it's still my clients need me, right? And so my own self-interest was to do nothing, was to just sit in bed panicked, basically. But that's not an option. These people are relying on me to help them, and so I have to, right? Next part of this is social workers draw on their knowledge, values, and skills to help people in need and to address social problems. Their knowledge, values, and skills to help people. So it's not like it doesn't ever say like know everything that you're supposed to know, like don't graduate school till you know everything you're supposed to know and do it perfectly every single time. Like that's not, no one can do that. But it does ask that, we do our best. Your knowledge, your values, your skills, I will say your skills might change day to day. Your knowledge and values hopefully increase over time. Um, but I say shouldn't go down, hopefully. But doing our best, just giving it our all as often as possible, and making sure, again, that we're like up to date on research so our knowledge is kind of always up to date. And then challenging yourself. I think people underestimate the value of challenging your skills. Um, when you first start, when you're like a little baby therapist, it's so hard. And you like graduate. I graduated school with really good grades, and I thought I was going to be killer amazing, best therapist there ever was. And then I quickly got put in my place on that, deservedly so. And I'm grateful for that. But it was not what I thought it would be because I was highly educated and didn't have a ton of skill yet. Luckily, I would say past that, but um, I'm only past that because I challenged myself. I'm only past that because I recognized that I was lacking in certain areas and that the only way to fix that was to be doing it, right? We tell our clients this kind of stuff all the time, like the only way to get through it is to go through it. The only way to improve your skill is to be using them every single day and be humble enough to say I didn't nail it there. That was not amazing. And be willing to improve for your clients. Like they need you to be willing to improve. And then let's see, social workers are encouraged to volunteer some portion of their professional skills with no expectation of significant financial return. This is that pro bono stuff. It's not expected, right? It doesn't say social workers are expected to volunteer. Um, but if you're a therapist, and you're trying to, work against poverty, or oppression, like sometimes that means giving it away. Like sometimes people simply don't have the money to access services. And if it's somebody who you can tell is going to be like putting their all into it and is like trying really hard to improve their life, I would say to some degree you have like a moral obligation to do what you can. And that's not give them every single session for free, and like lose out on your own paycheck to help them. Like that's definitely not what we want. But it's just, I had a client once who really he couldn't afford much and he was truly doing his absolute goddamn best every single day. Like he was trying so hard. And I would give him one free session a month. So I wasn't like just giving him all of his sessions for free. It was just that way he could have a little bit less on his plate. And like, I mean, yeah, I missed out on an hour of pay, but the hour of pay to me means so much less than the cost of a session to him. And that's where, the first part of like elevating service to others above self-interest, like, do I want the money for the hour? Duh, of course I do. Like, money is amazing. We live in a capitalist society. We all need it. But do I need that money more than I think he does? And in his case, I would say no. On the next slide, when we talk about forensic clients, I will say there are some people who would take advantage if you're too nice. But the whole point here with service is service for everyone who needs it, and doing kind of the best service you personally are capable of providing. Next slide. Okay, so this is the same thing. This is still just service. It's verbally speaking. You've got the exact same slide in front of you, different picture, same slide. Because this is service with forensic clients and it's different. I mean, you're still definitely trying to, draw on your knowledge, values, and skills to help the people in need to address social problems, like that's still true. You're still encouraged to volunteer some of your time pro bono. It's just that it looks a lot different. So, elevating service to others above your self-interest. Like, how does this work with forensic clients who maybe are like good at manipulation, who say, wow, she's got like a really big heart. I bet I could get whatever I want out of her. You're going to have a client like that. You're going to have a client who's going to know if you're like kind of a softie, and they might take advantage of that or manipulate that. So you got to make sure you're kind of on your toes with these guys so that yes, you're still helping them, like you are still quote elevating service above self-interest, but also not helping them so much that it's like enabling and them like taking advantage of you, and also not being so like hard on your sleeve, die hard F the system type beat that they're like, okay, that girl, like I can take advantage. There's a balance, and I think it's hard to find when you first start. I think I had trouble with that when I first started, but over time you kind of get better at it, I think. So drawing on your knowledge, values, and skills to help people in need. I think this is if you if you're on the same page with me as this, I think this will make sense. But our clients are exposed. I describe this as exposed. I use that term very intentionally. Our clients are exposed to the American justice system. And putting all, political beliefs aside, the American justice system is garbage. It's like hard for me to even describe how bad it is. In my master's degree, I did all of my electives in criminal justice instead of social work because I knew I was going to be going into forensic work. And oh my God, I remember I did a presentation on the Eighth Amendment. And I remember reading about this lady who was like 8.5 months pregnant in prison, and she went up to the CO and was like, hey, I'm in a lot of pain. I don't know like what's going on, but I'm scared. And the CO basically was like, go back to your cell. Like, I don't get, leave me alone, right? And she had a stillbirth and died in her cell. So she and her baby both died. Because I don't remember everything that happened, but the baby came early and there was like something was like ruptured, I think. I don't understand pregnancy. But anyway, my point with that is like that woman could still be alive today if that CO had tried to actually help. And that's just one example. Okay, I'm telling you, I did an entire class on this stuff. It's one example of the ways the American justice system violates the Eighth Amendment, which is, for the record, the one that no cruel and unusual punishment. A lot of countries don't even do like isolation kind of punishments. And all this, my point here, all of this to say that it's a horrible system that no one deserves to be a part of. I suppose I should clarify this is my opinion, but I assume most people would agree if they've seen like really how this shit works. And we want to get them out of that system. Like our goal as therapists is to help them improve their lives. And one of the best ways to improve forensics clients' lives is to get them fully out of the justice system, like out of prison, out of court, off probation, and living a life that's like incompatible with ever returning to the justice system. Like our goal is to get them out and keep them out. And that requires skills that they obviously don't have or they wouldn't have been there in the first place. So we do kind of, as it says here, we owe them our knowledge, values, and skills to help them not evade, they've already been in it, sorry, to help them get out of the justice system. And we owe them our best. We owe them our best to make that happen. And then lastly on here, social workers are encouraged to volunteer some portion of their professional services with no expectation of significant financial return. Pro bono services, right? Again, it's not expected, it's encouraged that we do pro bono services. But again, like not everyone's fortunate enough to have access. And I mean, the client I gave one free session a month to, he was obviously a forensic client because that's who I work with. But I will say there are some kind of, with forensic clients, and I guess with other clients as well, but there are like caveats to this, I guess. Like if you have a client who is on your pro bono list, unable to afford services, but like still smoking weed every day, still has like their, daily Pepsi or whatever. Still smoking cigarettes is a big one. Any of those kind of things where like they could have more money. Um, to be fair, so it's said like some people excuse me, some people make so little money that budgeting isn't the problem. Some people just have so little money that the only option they have is like hope for pro bono, basically. But the clients who do have enough money for weed and cigarettes, and I almost said booze, but most of them can't drink, but any of those kind of things. Fast food is a common one. The clients who have enough money for that, they might have enough money for treatment, right? And you can't you can't say like don't do that. If you want to be able to afford treatment, quit smoking weed. You can't say that, but you can say like, okay, well, let's look at your budget. Let's like, take a look at how much you're spending on just everything. And then when you get to weed, cigarettes, Pepsi, whatever the heck, I almost dropped an unnecessary F-bomb. When you get to those items, maybe adding those up and like showing them kind of just the math on it and saying like, well, if you gave this stuff up, you could afford one more session a month. But like they need to be the one to get to it, right? If you just like tell them, they're just going to have their own personal reasons that that's not going to work. But then not offering those clients pro bono services. I think when you offer those clients pro bono services, you're enabling them, you're not helping them. And our job is not to enable our clients, our job is to help our clients. Um, so to kind of summarize all of this, when you're doing service in the forensic field, the biggest thing I think to watch out for is potential manipulation and like requesting pro bono services when they don't actually need it. Keep in mind they have like probation fees and that kind of stuff, so their lives are legitimately quite difficult. And then with the goal, all of this kind of with the underlying goal of getting them out of the justice system in a way where they never return. So that's our service that we're providing. Okay, sorry, I had to step away for just a second, so I'm just starting back over, but I think we're good. I don't think it changed anything with the recording. Okay, this ethical principle, social justice. I think we all kind of know what this term means, but like the application of it in real life is kind of a balance, because you have to go against the status quo, so to say. Kind of an if you see something, say something. But that's like not easy. And then also like knowing when to do that, knowing how to do that. I think that does require some level of training. Like I think we all know injustice when we see it, but knowing how to appropriately respond to injustice is, I would say, a very different thing. Um, so this talks a lot about just different vulnerable populations, and it has like kind of a primary focus on poverty, unemployment, and discrimination, and then other forms of social injustice. I think the reason unemployment is a point of focus, I think, is because it causes poverty. Also, some people are unemployed because of their own personal reasons, and so those might be related and worth also, enacting social justice. But unemployment causes so many like downstream problems. Poverty in the capitalist world that we live in, which I would say has like an increasing disparity in wealth, poverty just causes like everything else. Like, I really think you could be like, what are the issues caused by poverty? And just like close your eyes and spin around a bunch of times and point, you're going to find an issue that's caused by poverty. Not literally, obviously, but it does cause so many problems. And so fighting against poverty, I think, is very important. And as we said with the service and the pro bono stuff, sometimes fighting against poverty is giving it away for free. Sometimes fighting against poverty is distributing resources. Sometimes it's volunteering your time. Sometimes it's just purely education for other people. It could be a lot of different things, but just keep in mind that I couldn't say this enough times. Sometimes the way to battle poverty is to give something away for free. And people don't like that. It's a very like pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of thing. But some people don't have bootstraps. Like some people start at such a extreme disadvantage that without being given resources, like truly given for free with nothing in exchange, they're not going to make it. And so sometimes that's our job. And then discrimination, it talks about, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this idea, but I don't think this will surprise anybody. We live in like a predominantly white Christian society. And I think our society is sort of built with that assumption in place that people are white Christians. I do think that's getting better. For the record, I think that is getting better. But it for a long time, like society sort of catered to those people. I will say I think there's kind of a chicken and an egg to this, and also I think it's more complicated than people think it is. Like for example, I don't think that like white Christian people are just like, thumbs down to anybody who's not white or Christian. I think it's more just that society was built, America was founded on like, I know everybody says no religion, but go read the history books. America was founded by people who had very strict religious beliefs and were coming away from, Europe, and were predominantly white. I think maybe all white. I don't want to claim that and not know. And so they built society for that. Like, it's not that society made this assumption and is like purposefully oppressing people. I do think some things are, but like general society, the average white Christian person isn't like oppressing their black atheist neighbor. It's just that society was built for the white Christian, and so life is just easier for them. And sometimes it's pure discrimination. Sometimes it's just racism, xenophobia. Like sometimes it's those kind of things, but sometimes it's actually just systemic oppression. And I think that's where we really come in is education and making like policy changes. Um, and then promoting sensitivity to and knowledge about these things. Um, it's education, right? I think a big thing that we can do is educate. I always say like start at home. Like educate your families first. One, it gets you like more comfortable with the education component. Two, your family's less likely to, I think, push back, like especially if it's people who do kind of trust, she's a therapist, she knows what she's talking about or something. And then when you are doing that education, making sure that you're doing it in what I would describe as like an open and curious way. So not saying like, hey, you're wrong, like that's wrong, that's bad, but instead saying like, did you know this? Like kind of making sure that they're not feeling accosted when you're trying to educate them, because that's just going to turn people off. And I also think this, I want to share like a funny, I don't know why this is so funny to me. But one of the things here, right, is like some people don't even know that these problems exist. And I think you'll have things in this, I would say, is social media where people are like, you know, Black Lives Matter is a good example. And then people say, well, all lives matter. And it's like, well, duh, like no one's saying that they don't, right? But you don't recognize, when you're white, you don't recognize a lot of the problems that Black people have. Like you just don't, because you don't experience them the way that they do. And it's not until they're pointed out to you, right? So once you're educated, then you can make those changes. So I think a lot of people don't know that these problems exist. Just one that's funny. This is what I was talking about a second ago. I remember once on the Ellen DeGeneres show, they had Bill Gates on as the guest, and they asked him like, he wanted to like, or his thing, they were making him play like a game, and it was like he needed to guess how much like each item cost or something. And I think it was like a box of Rice-A-Roni, like something, it was like 99 cents. Like it was something very low level, and he guessed $10, or something to that tune. And it's so funny to me. Like that man is so, so, so out of touch with what poverty actually is, that like he thinks that like what I would consider like sort of a low income food, he thinks it's $10. Like low income people can't afford that for their side dish to cost $10. Like that's bananas. And yeah, it's just funny. It's just a good example of the fact that like oftentimes people are so out of touch that they don't even know that these problems are happening. My computer just beeped, so hopefully not because it stopped recording. It looks good. Things look good, so we're just gonna proceed. Um, Oh, another one I've put on here is I think it's important for us to normalize mental illness, maybe more accurately, normalize therapy, normalize that people struggle and people need help, and that there is absolutely nothing wrong with getting help. I have a tattoo that says mental health matters, and I did for a while have a bumper sticker. It's a long story, not worth getting into. That's gone. But just explaining to people like mental health is real. Some people I think that like mental illness is like a moral failing or like a character defect. It's not. And finding ways to, in open and curious ways, explain to people that it is very real and that people do struggle. Um, Let's see. Social workers strive to ensure access to needed information. Oh, okay. This would be like telehealth kind of stuff. Like some people don't have access, right? And sometimes that's financial and sometimes it's location or transportation. And so telehealth services, I think, create like a huge increase in access. It doesn't solve the problem and it definitely comes with its own set of problems, which I have a whole slide about telehealth. But that would be the idea here, like striving to ensure access. Telehealth could be a great example of that. Um, One question that I think is interesting as far as like ensuring access is like, do we favor our business, our clinic, and our own paycheck over the people, over society? And the answer obviously has to be no, but how do you like guarantee access and maintain a business at the same time? Like, I don't own a therapy practice and I don't know if I ever want to, but I will say that I can only imagine how difficult it is to have to sometimes turn people away because of their personal ability to access something, to, I don't know, like, yeah, just turning people away in general. Um, it's not always an easy decision, and I'm sure of it. Like I've had to discharge clients that I didn't want to discharge, but I knew it was kind of like a help versus enabling thing that it was time to discharge them. And I do it because it's definitely the right thing to do, but it's not easy. And I would imagine that owning a business, that would be so much harder. Um, okay, we are not making good time. I'll just be honest. So next one is social justice in the forensic field. See, now I'm nervous because my computer beeped before and now it's not letting me advance slides. I think I'm gonna have to stop for 1 second here. That was weird. I'm not sure. Like as soon as I hit stop, it let me go to the next slide, but whatever. Okay, let's see. So social justice in forensic is a lot different. I'm going to go through, I'm not going to read all the things just because we are not making good time. But social workers or I should say therapists, like you do not have to be a social worker for this to be applicable. You could still have your CEU. But in the forensic field, this is where what I was talking about before with the vulnerability comes in. Like these people did put themselves in this position. They made a decision that put them in this position. And so, yes, they're like sort of self-oppressed, or they are kind of like um, I wouldn't say willfully vulnerable, but like something close to that. Um, it's our job to not really care about that part. And especially like if you do have that goal of getting people out of the justice system and then helping them create a life that's like not possible for them to return to the justice system. If that's your goal, which I just genuinely hope that it is, the fact that they are sort of self-oppressed is somewhat irrelevant. I also think like, yes, they are self-oppressed. Yes, they put themselves in this position, but a lot of the side effects of being in prison are so far outside of what they consented to when they did whatever they did. They are self-oppressed, but some portion of that is the system is broken. Let's see. So change efforts. So this is the poverty, unemployment, discrimination thing. Unemployment is more difficult when you're working with people who have felonies and especially people who have sex offenses. It is very common for them to be impoverished. And I think part of that, I'm going to use this in an intentionally pejorative way, is because they're sex offenders and drug addicts, right? Because of that, people are really okay with just treating them like garbage. And so people don't really care that they are oppressed or that they're struggling, that they don't have money, that they're unemployed. People, I think, to some degree want them to be unemployed. Um, and so, yeah, poverty is like pretty common amongst our clients. I do have some clients who like somehow have managed to find jobs that pay. I have a couple clients who make more money than I do, but it's not common. Like for the most part, my clients are working for minimum wage and like barely scraping by. And it's like I said earlier, like it's not about helping them budget because sometimes it's just not budgetable. Like sometimes the money isn't there. And so then it becomes showing them what resources they have available, like helping them apply for Medicaid or something like that. Um, the injustice one is also interesting. So it says like, we're fighting against blah, 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 and other forms of injustice. What's injustice when they're being punished for a crime? What is justice? Like, who do we owe justice to? if they're a danger to society, but they're our client, like who? I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I think the answer is just about balance. It's about making sure that you are honoring the needs of society while also honoring the needs of your client and trying to find them justice where you can. I do think, and I will double down on this every single time, that there is a lot of injustice in the justice system. And just because they're being punished for a crime doesn't mean that they deserve like everything they're doing. You know, we all probably know about all these other countries that their justice system is so much different than ours, and they have so much success with, um, altering criminal thinking. Whereas the way that our justice system is set up, it's just simply not. It's not helping. I know from my criminal justice classes that the science is in and it's not working. Oftentimes it's making things worse. And so that's not justice, right? Like, even if your goal with justice is to bring punishment to the client, like maybe that is something you believe in as far as justice. It's still like what they're doing with a lot of these people and the way they treat people in prison. That goes so far past what justice is. And so it kind of becomes our job as people who work with this type of client to stand up for that guy. Like, the little guy we stand up for is the person who has a felony, is the person who harmed someone else and needs someone to stand up for them, which is, I would say, a very complicated balance. And then let's see. Oh, okay. Promoting sensitivity and knowledge about these things. Um, do you tell people what you do for a living? And I'm especially asking people on the sex offense task force, and more specifically clinicians on the sex offense task force. Do you tell people what you do for a living? I do. I proudly tell people what I do. I'm a therapist for sex offenders. And it's almost always like this. What do you do for a living? I'm a therapist for sex offenders. Is that so scary? Is that a scary job? That's like almost always the response. But I take those moments. I like get happy when someone asks me what I do because I know I'm about to have an opportunity to educate. Um, and I haven't changed very many people's mind about sex offenders, but I have changed a couple. My dermatologist, I remember after we talked, just we were talking while he was like putting some stuff in a scar that I had, and by the end of it, when I was leaving his office, he said like, "You've really changed my mind about how I'm viewing sex offenders right now," and I was like, "Hell yeah, like that's amazing." And I think we should all kind of have that goal. It's not going to work every time. Like I said before, like my husband has lost friends because of what I do for a living. And I don't think I've actually lost any friends over it, which is, I guess, sort of unfortunate for my husband. But um, just the education, just doing it in an approachable way. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a therapist with sex offenders. Is that so scary? And not saying like, no, idiot, like that's not helpful, right? But instead saying like, I was scared at first, like when I first got into this, I thought it would be something very different than what it is, but actually like these are just normal people who are trying to put their lives back together. And they did make a mistake in their lifetime, but it doesn't mean that they're like irredeemable. Kind of explaining it from that like calm, level-headed perspective. Let's see, and then resources. Ensuring access to resources. Um, Obviously, you can't like give anything to your clients. You could give them therapy for free, but beyond that, like you should not be just like gifting things to your client, maybe a book or something, but not anything like serious. So don't be ensuring access to anything like that. But you can help them access other stuff. Like, I have clients who don't have access to the internet, so I'll like print maps for them. If they like have a job interview and they don't know how to get to the place, like I'll help them figure it out on the bus route and print it for them, or in some way help them write it down or whatever, because they don't have access to the internet. And I can't give them access to the internet, but I can give them, my time and have it put toward them being able to get their job interview. People who don't have a car, let me make sure this is said. Don't give your clients rides. Don't do it. In the dead of winter, I always want to, and like just driving past them when they're walking down the hill, I'm like, it like, like I really want to give them a ride. But think of it from the perspective of liability. If you got into a car accident with them in your car, you're on the line for that, and they could, I mean, hopefully wouldn't, but could sue you. So yeah, don't give clients rides. That's not even what this slide is about. But while we're talking about giving people stuff, helping people with stuff, that's not the one. But yeah, so some clients don't have a car, so it wouldn't be give them a ride. It might be like offer them a different group time so that they're coming during the day when it's not as cold, or I don't know, seeing if someone in their group would be willing to help them carpool, or just different things. Like you're not giving them anything, you're helping them access things for themselves. Um, and then let's see, I think yeah, that's everything for this slide. So hopefully it'll let me go to the next one. Oh, goody. Okay. Dignity and worth of the person. I'm actually going to go through the non-forensic one, this first one, quickly, because the dignity and worth one for forensic populations is something near and dear to my heart. I've already made the personal decision that I'm going to be making another ethics presentation about specifically like dignity and worth when working with forensic populations. I It's something that needs to be talked about, but so I'm going to give you the quick version on this non-forensic one. Sorry, I'm a fidgeter. But we'll talk more about each one during the forensic one. So hold please. Okay. Hopefully everyone already knows what cultural competence is. I'm not going to get too deep into it just because hopefully you do know that already, but the idea of cultural competence is just that you understand that you are a person and the person in front of you is a different person with different culture, different background, potentially like different ethnicity. Like there could be a lot of differences, and treating them with their culture, not yours, is the best way that I could say it. So, just for example, like if you have a client in front of you who already has told you that they're an atheist, when you're going over coping skills, you probably wouldn't use prayer as an option. But when I'm working with clients who I know have like a strong connection to religion in their life, I do recommend prayer as a coping skill, and we talk about like how they feel like that's helpful for them. I've had people when I ask them to do their support network, they include God. And I don't know, I mean, you can't actually like call God on the phone if you're struggling, but I still think it counts and I let them. And you know, I wouldn't offer that to an atheist client, or I don't know, like a Hindu client or something where they just don't have that same kind of belief. I'm not going to offer that. That's cultural competence. Or a big one that I've noticed, especially with my male sex offense clients, if they are, I think this is mostly from like Mexico, but really, I think maybe it's just Latino in general. I don't want to be speaking out of hand, but I think so. But it's this concept called machismo, and the idea is like, you know, like be a man's man, like just, you know what I mean? Like just kind of you're tough and nothing can get you down and you don't have emotions and like this kind of thing. It's actually like valued in that culture, and I will say that's a hard one to work with in forensic populations, which we're not to yet, but whatever, because it's valued to them. So you don't want to tell them to not do that. Instead, you want to help them like channel it into something that's going to be helpful. Um, let's see. I think that's for the most part. We've talked about dual responsibility. Um, yeah, that's good enough. You guys understand cultural competence, and that is like the biggest thing. Oh, the other thing with dignity and worth, I guess that should be said, is self-determination, which is like they make their decisions, right? So you're not there to tell them what to do or like pick the right path for them. You're there to ask them what path they want to be on and then offer them the skills and insight necessary for them to go down that path. So it's not about, you know, you might know like that's a horrible decision. You should probably not make that decision. It's not your job to tell them that. It's your job to say like, what do you think would be the consequences of that decision? And if they outline them and they still want to make that decision, you have to let them because they are self-determinate. They can, you know, run their own lives. Okay, this is like my favorite topic. Like I will try to keep it as brief as possible, but I think this is just so interesting. Um, so, okay, I already talked about the Eighth Amendment, so I'm going to kind of skip some notes that I put here about that. But just keeping in mind that like these are people who have already been treated so poorly, and we don't need to make that worse. So society has, especially with sex offenders, society has already let them know that they're like a second class piece of garbage, right? We don't need to do that. Like they live within a culture that rejects them. They don't need to come into an office that rejects them too. It's not conducive to positive therapy. And I'm not saying anyone is doing that, but if you are, like, you are in the wrong field. You are with the wrong population. Um, so self-determination, though, is, I think, a really interesting concept when you're working with people who have like antisocial thinking. Um, it does say socially responsible self-determination, which is worth noting. Like if you have a client who is, I don't know, let's say they drink a lot, and like anytime they drink, they end up committing a violent crime. If you know they're going to drink, you don't report it, right? But you do kind of have this role where you need to sort of jump in and say like, well, last time you did that, here's what happened. And you don't interrupt their self-determination, but you do definitely like get a little more firm than you would with like a non-forensics client. Um, and another thing with these guys, with forensic clients, is they are mandated. They are mandated to treatment. They have mandated curriculum. We're required to report their violations. They have to do a polygraph. They have to do a measure of sexual interest. In doing the polygraph and sexual interest, they have to tell us things that they, in a normal client, they wouldn't have to disclose these things if they didn't want to. They have so little self-determination because of the way that like mandated treatment, particularly for sex offenders, is set up, that self-determination is nearly gone. And so any self-determination they have left, helping them like foster that and helping them see things in their life that they do have control over, I think that is so very important. Um, and then there are always going to be things that our clients just can't do, that we wish they could, right? I have had clients who can't see their kids on Christmas, and despite the fact that I genuinely believe that they are low enough risk that it would be okay for them to go stay the night for Christmas at their family's house, they can't. There are just, that's for some clients, that's just never going to happen. I don't know how anybody could do this without taking a drink at least 50 times. 3 hours is an insane amount of time to talk. Um, so, okay, so I think that the kids on Christmas example is a really good one for um, self-determination. So let's say you have like a non-forensic normal client who wants to see his kids on Christmas, but they live out of state and he doesn't have the money to get there. You could sit down with this guy and like help him set like goals that could potentially help them get there. So with that client, you would say like, okay, well, what are the barriers? Like, what do we need to overcome and how are you going to overcome them, right? When you have a client who's just legally not allowed to see his children, it's not what are the barriers and how do we help you overcome them? It's these are the barriers, how do we help you cope with them? So it's a very different type of treatment because you can't help them overcome this. You have to help them overcome the emotional response to it. But the actual like circumstances themselves aren't going to change, and you definitely can't encourage them to go. So what we can do though is like we can change their level of impact. Well, we can't change it. We can help them acknowledge their capacity to change the impact this has on them. I'm sure you have like some clients who are just so downtrodden and, believe that society is just gonna, you know, shift them off to an island somewhere, or even might feel like they already have been. And then you might have clients who are like, this sucks, but it's not that serious, right? They're going to have varying levels of impact, but I think the ones that are, farther down the scale, we do have the capacity to help them change that impact, just by helping them change their perspective and like develop emotional coping. But we don't have a way to lessen that impact. Like it's going to be there. It's just a matter of like how well can they deal with it, basically. Um, so let's see. I'm just scrolling through my notes on this. Um, Okay. I do also with cultural competence as it relates to dignity and worth. Um, cultural competence with people with forensic charges. I think there's a slide later where I can talk about this a little more just to kind of get this moving. But people who have been to prison have their own culture. People who have been to prison have a very different culture than like general society. And we have to work within that framework. Like, especially people who have been to prison for like years on end, they have developed a completely different personality. In fact, there's a term like prisonization, where they like that's their code, that's their life, and that's the culture that's sitting in front of you, regardless of what culture they were born and raised with. They are someone who's been in prison for a long period of time, and that is a part of their personality that you have to work with. I'll say more about that later. And I'm also going to make an entire slideshow, whether anybody wants it or not, about this because cultural competence with prison populations is just so much different. Um, let's see. Resolving conflicts between client interests and broader society's interests. Again, when you're working with people who have committed like violent and or egregious crimes, it is harder to balance like society's best interest over the client's, because at the end of the day, like if the client's going to do something that's going to harm someone, you have to jump in, and you have to at any given time. I think when you have a forensic client in front of you, you really have to be like focused on um, the fact that they could be dangerous, right? So you have to like hear everything they're saying. You're almost like playing two roles in your head where one is like the therapist who's listening and hearing and empathizing and all these things. And the other role that has to be kind of happening inside your head is someone who I don't know, like a safety manager. Like you have to be kind of aware of like, okay, is this headed in a direction where he might end up unsafe? Is this headed in a direction where he might end up violent or, committing a new offense or something? It's a hard balance. I think you get better at it with time. When I first started, I did not have that balance in any meaningful way, but I think I have improved. Um, Anyways, all this to say, I could go on about dignity and worth with forensic populations forever. But they have so very little dignity and so very little worth based on society's like standards for them. So give that to them. Give that to them the best you can in every given session. They deserve it just as much as anybody else, and they have so much less of it than everyone else. Okay. So a quick aside on dignity and worth. So this is a picture of something. Oh, you won't be able to see it unless I'm able to move my. We'll see if I can move my face. You'll be able to see it. If not, what you could look up is the Boston Liberation Health Triangle. And like I said, if anyone requests them, I'll just send them my slides without audio so you can see it. But the idea behind the Boston Liberation Triangle is people aren't just like suddenly monsters, right? Like somebody who commits a sex offense, we do this, we talk about life history, lifestyle factors with these clients. Somebody who commits a sex offense is it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like they happen after like a lot of symptoms build up over time. And a lot of those symptoms start with the culture that they're in. They start with things that are happening at home, things that are happening in some cases like at school or out in society. Like they come from a lot of different places. And there is something to be said for the fact that it was a choice they made, but it was also a choice that was influenced by everything that happened before it. Um, I remember when I had my job interview for Alpha Counseling, I was asked, I don't actually remember how he asked it, but I remember telling him that I know that if I had lived the same life as the client, right? If I had been born to their parents, and had all of their cousins and siblings and friends in school, and I remember saying if I had worn the same weird shirt to school on that day in the third grade, right? If I had lived their exact same life, like second by second, I would have committed the sex offense. I would have. And that like that you can't dispute that because obviously like their life second by second led up to that. And so mine would have too. And so recognizing that these behaviors absolutely are egregious and unacceptable, but they're also very understandable. And because these clients deserve dignity and worth, you need to also be willing to understand that you would have done the same thing. I think it helps you see the person in front of you as a person because you're aligning sort of with not the behavior, but just with the fact that we're all a product of our circumstances. So yeah, I would highly recommend looking up the Boston Liberation Health Triangle if you have like more questions about that. Next slide. Human relationships. This is not, I mean, you have a relationship with your client, obviously, and you have like a responsibility to that relationship. But this is actually more about like other relationships that you can use to help your clients. So, um, I don't know, maybe you have a close relationship with like one of the stakeholders in your company, and they have, I don't know, something that can, I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but they have a way that they can like help your client that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Don't damage that relationship, right? You have to be willing to maintain relationships with people. Not willing, you have to be able to maintain relationships with people um, who have resources. And in some regard, like, are you using those people? Maybe, I don't know, but are you letting them use you also? Yeah, it's a duality for sure. Um, so the people who can help, back in the day, I used to work, God, that was so long ago. I worked on like the medical marijuana project when it was still very grassroots in Utah, and like making relationships with policy people, the kind of people who worked on the Hill. And I didn't like a lot of them. I don't think that they're always like brilliant people with the best interests of society at heart, but I do think that there are people who, if you want to make a difference, you have to have good relationships with them. Um, those relationships are the ones we're talking about here. So the NASW refers to relationships as vehicles for change, and just keeping in mind that that change can be good and that change can be bad. And it's kind of up to you whether that change is good or bad based on how you maintain that relationship. And then one last thing on this slide is I call it the duality of human relationships. And there's the duality of, we have a relationship to the client and also to society. That's a duality. This is more of a philosophical duality, where you really have to be aware of like you have a relationship with the client, right? But they have a relationship with you. And so you also need to be aware of like how your relationship impacts the client and also how their relationship impacts you and how they feel about that. And then also just like how they see you, and then this also kind of broadens to other clinicians in your company, your boss, your employer, whatever, your stakeholders, society in general. The way people are engaged with you and the way that you engage people in your life makes a difference in how you're able to treat your client. Let's see, engage people as partners in the helping process. That's, I would say, I basically just explained that. Okay, next slide. Mm, okay. Human relationships in the forensic field. So you're still going to have the same kinds of relationships. Like you still have your client, you still have stakeholders, you still have your employer, your coworkers, colleagues. You have all of this, right? You also have this added relationship with the probation officer, parole officer, that you wouldn't have otherwise. And here's the deal, a probation officer can like make or break your client's treatment, right? I am highly aware of the fact that if I have a good relationship with my client's probation officer, my client has a better time on probation. And I don't think that's the probation officer's fault. I think it's important to say that I don't think it's the probation officer, like, if I don't have a good relationship with the therapist, my client's screwed. Like, I don't think that's what it is. I think that it's a natural human tendency, that if you have a good relationship with someone, you like trust them to be able to do what they're supposed to do in your life. And so, by knowing who I am and by having really good communication with the POs and all of this stuff, like, it just makes it where the clients have an easier time, and that's our role ultimately. So just making sure, yeah, that you're always keeping your client's best interest in mind, even when working like with their probation officer. And sometimes probation officers, for example, like don't respond to an email literally ever, and you have a situation that you're trying to handle and they don't answer their phone, and they're the ones that are kind of not using their relationship as a vehicle for change. But if you want to keep your client, safe, not safe, but like out of legal harm's way, um, you still have to maintain that positive relationship. Like, you can't call this dude's boss and be like, "Your freaking employee never answers the phone and this PO and blah blah blah." You have to like find a way to approach the situation calmly and maintain, proper composure when you're talking with them, or you're just gonna make it worse. Um, let's see. APMP, covered that. Oh, restoring relationships. So this one's like, I would say my favorite part of my job by like miles is watching families get put back together. Is that reunification process, and not necessarily like the reunification of like, just for example, like a father and his in-home victim who's, maybe his child. It's obviously more complicated, and I'll actually say I've never had that be successful. So that one's not as rewarding. But like the guys who haven't been able to see their kids for like 6 months while they're doing that first 180 days, seeing the smile on their face when they get approved to see their kids for the first time in so long. It's kind of devastating, like the fact that they didn't get to see their kids for so long, but it's also such a beautiful thing. And it is a good example of like how important relationships are to people, that your client, like when they lose those relationships, it's a huge detriment to their mental health. And when they get them back, it's such an improvement to their mental health. So I mean, I think relationships as a concept kind of speak for themselves, like why they're important. But oh, also I would say like make sure you're keeping a good relationship with your coworkers. Um, like I have one-on-one clients who are in someone else's group. We're a treatment team. At that point, we're a treatment team. And just making sure that I have a good relationship with my client's treatment team so that I feel comfortable talking to them about something, so that they feel comfortable talking to me about something, and so that we have this like positive vehicle for change. Next slide, integrity. This is the one with self-care, and it's got a lot. Self-care is not the only thing, but self-care is my favorite part of this. Okay. So being aware, so integrity, right? Being aware of the mission, the values, everything, and upholding them. It's not just about knowing them. Hopefully you kind of already understand the mission by now. If you don't, it's on that, I guess, third slide. So the first one's the title slide, the second one is the knowledge check, and then the third one is the one with the mission on it. So if you need to go back, you can. And then the standards component, like we'll talk about that in a little bit, but hopefully you understand the values at this point. Hopefully you understand the mission. But integrity is upholding those values and following that mission. And then taking measures to care for yourself, both professionally and personally. I think it's really interesting that they put this under integrity, and I do understand why, but I feel like it's like such a curveball. I think that the reason they put this under integrity is that you can't be like the best therapist you can be if you're burnt out. And in order to maintain like true integrity, you have to be like bringing your A game every single time. And you simply can't do that if you're burnt out. And so, taking care of yourself is the way to avoid that. And I think especially with forensic populations, which we'll talk about in a second, burnout is easy to come by. But if you're taking good care of yourself, if you're, having good hobbies and like, spending your free time wisely and doing kind of decompression, getting good sleep, that kind of stuff, you'll have an easier time for sure. I'll also say with self-care, um, let's say you're the kind of person who, I don't know, doesn't get good sleep regularly. You might end up like not as good of a therapist because you're tired, and you also like might end up having to cancel on your clients for various reasons, like sleep affects, for example, like your immune system. And so just making sure you're taking care of yourself in all aspects so that you're not having to cancel on your clients, like that's kind of a big deal. Um, and then, yeah, just making sure that you're taking care of your needs. You definitely have to find like a balance between that, like, above self-interest and still self-care concept. It's hard to say like where one ends and the other starts. Like, where do you put your self-interest down for the client and where do you put self-care in? There's a balance, and I'm not sure there's a right answer because it's going to be like dependent on the situation basically. But being aware that yeah, self-care matters. I would also say in this, like, you should have kind of a high bar for canceling on your client. Um, it should be a low enough bar that you're able to take care of yourself. Like, don't show up if you're dying, right? Have a low enough bar that it's still self-care, but have a high enough bar that you're not just like canceling over every little thing. Um, they're not going to get what they need out of treatment if you're just canceling on them all the time. Um, So what I could boil this slide down to is basically integrity is reliability, and self-care and just the way that you run your day-to-day life is what affects your reliability. So if you want to have integrity, you need to have reliability. And if you want to have reliability, you need to practice self-care. So there you have it. Next slide. Integrity and self-care in forensic therapy. I mean, obviously the mission and values and all of that stays the same. There are obviously nuances with these populations. We've already talked about them, but that part stays the same. The self-care, though, I think is very different. I have read some PSIs that are like bone chilling, like just some of the things I've read that clients like said or did to a child. Um, they're hard to read. I do have this fun little benefit where I have this thing called aphantasia. So I can't picture stuff in my mind. Like right now, my husband's not in the room, so I can't see him in here. I have like no inner eye. Um, and so when I read a PSI, it's just words, still horrifying words, but just words. Whereas, like, I'm sure those of you who can picture stuff in your head, who do have some version of an imagination, um, God damn, like I don't even know. I'm sure it's so much worse if you're able to picture this stuff. I consider it almost a superpower in this job. And I think that when you're reading that kind of stuff, like take a break, drink some tea, something like do something to step away from like the emotional overload that comes with that, and making sure that you're not like letting it get to you because you'll get burnt out a lot faster. Um, and then we work with like dark triad clients, right? And so you really have to keep yourself attuned with that. They will drain you. They will drain you. The cognitive load of like having relationships with those type of people can really impact like your reliability, which as we said impacts your integrity. So making sure that you are, if you need to, like talking to your supervisor if something's bothering you, talking to your loved ones regularly to make sure you're kind of having like positive stuff coming in. And then definitely like, yeah, your sleep and all of that other like emotional stuff. When I first started this job, I got a therapist because I was reading like just some crazy shit in PSIs and I needed to like talk to someone. Um, and just kind of like, I mean, obviously I'm not giving away like client information or anything, but just having someone that I can be like, I read crazy shit and it's like impacting the way I act at home. Um, that was so important. It was so absolutely necessary. I don't need it anymore. I kind of have like developed my own skills for it, but develop those skills. If you don't have them yet, develop them. Um, let's see, acting honestly and responsibly to promote ethical practices on the part of the organization with which you are affiliated. So my organization is Alpha Counseling. That's the organization I am affiliated. So I owe integrity to Alpha Counseling. I owe ethical practice to Alpha Counseling. I'm going to talk about fraud in a minute. That is definitely like not an I almost said integrous. I don't think that's a word. That's not integrity to my organization if I'm committing fraud, but we'll talk about fraud more in a second. But also part of it is like Alpha Counseling and like whatever, clinic you work for if you're in forensic therapy. Um, they already have like a different magnifying glass from society. They already have people who are like, we're counting on you to keep society safe. You have very dangerous people in your care, and your employer is trusting you to do a good enough job that like the client doesn't negatively represent your employer in some way by committing another crime. Um, if you had a client who like reoffended, you would definitely want to be sure, and your employer would also want to be sure that you could say you were doing everything correctly, that you were acting in ethical practice, that you were following all of the rules. If you're not doing that and you have a client reoffend, like you're gonna have such a big social problem on your hands, and it's going to impact the organization with which you are affiliated. So keep that in mind. I have to fidget again. I'm such a fidgeter, it's crazy. It's just who I am as a person. Um, okay, so competence. This is like why you have to do continued education. We talked about this already with like the improving your knowledge thing. Um, you should always be striving to increase your professional knowledge and skills. Again, and I already said this, but ethics never asks you to be perfect, right? You're not expected to like know the right answer every single time and make the right move every single time. But you are expected to be competent in what you're doing and to make sure that the moves you're making at least make sense. You are expected to be kind of in a continuous way educating and challenging yourself so that you're getting better and better, not only for your clients, but for society. And so that you can also like avoid complacency. If you're not really ever striving to improve, at some point, like the world will pass you by and you will not be good at what you're doing. These, people in your clinic, forensic or not, people are like trusting you to give them the best treatment possible. And if you're not paying attention during CEUs or, whatever like skill building you're doing, that's going to impact your client like pretty severely. Consider like if you went to the doctor and you found out later, or even just found out right beforehand, that the doctor like skips through their CEUs and just like goes to the end and takes the quiz. Um, would you want to see that doctor? Like, I wouldn't. I would not want to see a doctor who I found out like didn't take their job seriously, and didn't like do their best to make sure they knew exactly what they were doing. That would be terrifying. And I don't think your clients want to see a clinician that acts that way either. And then also, I mean, this is a living field, right? Like we are discovering new things every day. And it's also something where things are changing every day, like policies change all the time. And so you have to kind of stay up to date on that stuff. You also do, in terms of competence, like have kind of an ethical obligation, not only to be competent, but not only to be competent, but to encourage competence for other people. And sometimes that includes like contributing to the knowledge base. Sometimes that includes like changing policy or like working toward policy change. Sometimes it might be creating a CEU, but just something where you're like kind of helping everyone else's competence at the same time as exercising your own. Uh-oh, my computer beeped again and then went to the next slide. I was done with that one, but I'm nervous. We'll see what happens. Competence in forensic therapy. Um, okay, this is much different, right? Because laws and policies that impact our clients are changing all the time. We went to a task force meeting yesterday. At the time of this recording, it was yesterday. And in that recording, or sorry, in that task force meeting, it was like a training. I can't remember how many they said. I'm not sure if they gave a number, but they said there were like a ton of policy changes that might be coming in May of this year, so in like 4 months. And it's our job to make sure we're up to date on those. It's also our job to contribute to those if we can. I don't know how much you can. I don't know how much I can, but I am always trying to like talk to people about it at least. But even just like attending these meetings where they kind of at least inform you of these changes, because then you can inform your clients, right? So it matters. It matters that you stay up to date on laws and policies, and especially the ones that impact your clients, or like new risk models, new assessment models. If something new comes out or like a new treatment type, like just knowing all of this stuff so that you can best help your client, and also so that you can best help like future clinicians who will also be helping clients. Um, Contributing to the knowledge base. Sex offender research is like relatively minimal. I mean that there is like I would say a decent amount, but like not compared to a lot of other types of clinical practice. Like there's obviously more research about depression than sex offenders, like just period, right? That's of course. And then female sex offenders, there's like even less. And so if you have access to that information, obviously go through appropriate channels like IRB and everything. There's like a whole other thing about research ethics, but if you have access to that information, you do sort of have like a competence ethical duty to gather that information and use it for research, to help future clinicians and future clients. And I would say especially female sex offenders, if you have access to that kind of thing, you should really be trying to use it for good, because there is so little research about that. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah. I wanted to put in a brief intermission, so I'm gonna just keep recording, but if you want to take like a 5-minute break, I have the most annoying voice in the world, and I've been talking at you for an hour and 42 minutes, and we still have basically that same amount of time left. And so if you need a minute, just take a break. I think it's good. It's, self-care, to pause. One, like kind of let a bunch of this sink in. And then two, just like get up, stretch your legs, dive a little deeper into anything you've been thinking about. Just take a minute. If you don't want to, I'm not going to know. So, what am I going to do about it? I'm going to keep recording, but I would encourage you to pause here and just go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, stretch your legs for a second, go say hi to your dog. I don't know, just something, okay? Next slide. So this is just a broad overview of the ethical standards. So previously we were talking about the ethical values, so competence and all these things that we want to uphold. These are like the standards. These are like the NASW refers to them as enforceable. So they're not just like aspirational, the way that like the values are. Like we aspire to be confident, we aspire to treat people with dignity and worth. These are enforceable. These are like there are consequences if you don't do it. And each standard has sort of like an umbrella underneath it of just multiple responsibilities. I'm going to focus a lot on our ethical responsibilities to clients, and then I will focus still on the other ones as well. But the ones for clients, there's just more of them, to be fair. And then also, I think they're just more nuanced, whereas like your ethical responsibilities like to your colleagues, it's just not nearly as like complicated as the stuff for your clients. So a lot of this I'm going to focus on the responsibilities to clients, but do keep in mind that all of these are important. It's just that they're not as complicated, so they're not worth as much like diving deep into. So okay, sorry, I stepped away for another second, but okay, next slide. Okay, this is a lot more about like that cultural competence. This is where I could, I truly will be making an entire CEU about this. But this cultural competence that we owe our clients, I do want to tell like a story about my husband. So my husband did a decent amount of time in prison. It was a long time ago. He's like, he's overcome it. But it's a good story to represent the fact that like you can take the man out of the prison, but I'm not so sure you can fully ever take the prison out of the man, because I think that the prison code will kind of just always be a part of my husband's culture because of how long he did in prison. So we were in Wendover and a guy, I'm sure this guy was just like drunk and not like paying attention at all, but he like accidentally shoulder checked my husband while we were in line, and my husband very quickly, like concerningly quickly, shoulder check and then you fucking lame, like very quickly. And I was like, whoa, what? Like I've never seen this side of you. And it's hard because I mean, okay, so for him, like he turned that around very quickly. Like he was like, whoa, sorry, man, I don't know where that came from, blah blah. And they were like, handshake and everything was good, whatever. But if that happens with our clients, right now especially, like they really probably don't even have the skills to turn that around. And even if they do, like they could get in trouble just even for like instigating something. And so working with them on the fact that like, yes, that is your culture, but there's a balance between like acknowledging that that's your culture and encouraging that culture in a non-carceral setting. You got to be careful because we do want to acknowledge that this is where they're from and this is like a big part of their personality. But we also have to acknowledge that that can get them in a lot of trouble. And then there's also this concept of like strengths-based approaches. And when you consider like prison culture, there is this like really deep strength that I think exists in prisons. And that is like it's like ingenuity. Like they they can make anything out of anything. I'm telling you. Like some guy in my group the other day was telling me like you can make a shiv out of styrofoam, and I didn't inquire any further. I don't need him to teach the whole group, obviously. But what? Like I don't know if that's true, but I wouldn't even be surprised because I've heard of just like some crazy stuff. Like I have a general understanding of how you make a prison tattoo gun because my husband decided that even though we have money, he wants one because you can't take the prison out of the man. And it's just like crazy. Like they can have just like a motor and a needle and like a mechanical pencil or something. I don't even fully understand it. And they can make a whole ass tattoo gun. Like that's ingenuity, right? And so using that as a strength instead of it is in that case being applied to break the rules, so using it as a strength instead, but saying like, look, if you can make this out of this, like what can you do in this situation? Like using it as, yeah, like a strength for them. Um, let's see. I just want to make sure I'm covering everything in these notes that I took. They don't have as much self-determination. We talked about that. We have to respect that they have a different culture. We talked about that. Oh, and then they have experiences of oppression that we will never understand. I always tell my sex offense clients, like, sometimes group might be kind of lame and you don't love having to go to group, and I get that. But the one thing you will get out of groups that you're not going to get anywhere else is a group of sex offenders. And you are going to be so happy to have people who understand the experience that you're having, because I get it. I get like the difficulties that they experience, and I can obviously empathize with that. But not in the same way that like these guys can. And I've had guys in my group tell me that they develop like really good friendships in group, and that they develop like such camaraderie that just doesn't exist anywhere else in their life, because no one else like knows what they're going through. And so encouraging that, I think just encouraging that they do kind of like foster that culture of like, it is like a prison code thing. And so there's it I want to be careful about how I say this. Like, you don't want to encourage that they're taking that prison mindset and applying it everywhere, but you do want to encourage that they're taking like that camaraderie that can develop in a prison setting, and that camaraderie that can develop in your groups when they have these similar struggles, and encourage that, like channel it in a good direction, basically. Um, let's see. Oh, and then lastly, I did write this note that, again, I'll use the pejorative intentionally. Like, we work with sex offenders and drug addicts, right? And there might be some clinicians who have a sordid past. I'm one of them. And their own story of recovery. I'm one of them. But not all clinicians will. And if you don't, that's totally okay. Like, you don't have to have like gone through hell and back to be a good clinician. In fact, you probably were able to get to it quicker and probably have, an easier life. But you're not going to be able to relate the same way. Like, you just don't know what some parts of it are like, and that's fine. You don't have to, but the goal here is to acknowledge that you don't know and encourage the client to educate you on like who they are and what they believe. Okay, next slide. Services. We talked about service as like a value. This is services as a standard and a responsibility. So you need to be putting in a reasonable effort. That's a big thing. So like if you're having to cancel on your clients, try to give them like an opportunity to reschedule. Like if you're unable to provide the services for whatever reason, try to at least give them an opportunity to reschedule it. And then just also keep in mind, like, it's your job here, like, to help them overcome like life struggles, and you can't do that if you're just like canceling on them all the time, right? And so there are some things where you're gonna have large disruptions in service. I think probably a really common one would be birth, like giving birth and needing maternity leave or paternity leave. Um, Giving your clients plenty of notice ahead of time, and then also like leaving it up to them how they want that disruption in services to proceed. So do they need a referral? Do they want to like maybe use this as an opportunity to practice their skills without therapy? Do they want to like specifically just keep going to group? Or do they just want to like, I guess I already said referral. I was going to say fully go to a new clinician, but just making sure they know their options, and then the kind of costs and benefits of each option. That's for, I would say, like the really long-term things. You might have like a death or an illness, some kind of grief that you're going through. You have to do self-care, right? You cannot pour from an empty cup. But you also, again, like can't abandon your clients. And I imagine that not imagine, I know that some deaths or some losses would be easier than others. Like some maybe you only have to miss a couple days, maybe you have to miss like 3 weeks for another one. Um, at some point you either owe them an explanation, or a referral, or at least like a check-in. And I know that that's hard, because obviously if you're grieving, you don't want to spend time talking to your clients. But you've taken on the role of helper in their life, and if you can't be there for that role, you at least owe them bare minimum an explanation, and more than likely some kind of like, sorry, there was like a big bang in my house. I don't know what that was. Some kind of explanation, or at least offer something else like in the interim, basically. I really wonder what that was, but I will not be going to find out. Referrals. Okay, if you do have to do a referral, so this could be because you need to take an extended vacation. It could also just be because you don't know how to do something that they're asking you to do. If you do have to do a referral, making sure that you do it correctly. So again, if it's something you don't know how to do, don't try to do it. That would violate this competence value that we talked about. And then also, even if you do know how to do something, if you're noticing that like something about the relationship you have with this client specifically is just not working. Like if you recognize that you are not an effective therapist for this person, like have enough humility to just own that and say, hey, I don't think I can help this client, and getting them like referred to someone else. And then when you are referring a client or if they are transferring services to someone else, um, this is where good notes, and we will have, there's a whole other slide about documentation, but good notes matter, okay? Like having a client transferred to you whose like file is just garbo is so unhelpful for the client. Like the client can hardly accomplish anything if they're basically having to start over with the new clinician. It's not fair to the client or to the other clinician. So making sure that you're keeping really good notes in case you're ever having to refer out. And also, if you are sharing notes, even if you know that it's going from you to another clinician, making sure that the client knows that those notes are being shared. It is very important that the client is aware of and giving permission for you to share their notes with someone. It could be the case if you're terminating a client, or excuse me, if you're referring a client out, maybe they want to like start fresh with this clinician. Maybe they don't want this clinician to know anything about them. And if that's the case, that's up to them, not you. So you need to make sure you're like giving them the option before actually like transferring everything. I will say with forensic clients that is a little different. There are certain things like risk scores and like progress reports, quarterly reports, like those kind of things are kind of necessary for us to understand like the client's risk and stuff. And so it is a little bit different, but it is still important to at least give the clients like awareness. Like don't just do it, like make sure they know exactly what's going to happen. Give them that like informed consent when there's a change happening. Um, let's see. Termination of services. If you notice that the client no longer needs services and you continue to provide them, that's called waste, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Obviously, with mandated treatments, there is like this sense of waste that happens. That's also in a later slide, so we will talk about it. But if you're not working with mandated clients, once you realize like they're good and or they're not getting anything out of this, you should not keep doing it. At that point, you're wasting their time, you're wasting their money, you're committing like what we would call fraud, waste, and abuse. Don't do that. You should, generally speaking, never be abandoning your client unless it's under what the NASW calls, quote, unusual circumstances. In like normal, non-forensic care, these unusual circumstances, it could be like, I don't know, maybe you do have like an extreme serious death that happens in your life and you like just need to go you got to quickly leave and go handle something. Like you may not have time to get them set up with a referral. And in that case, you would make sure someone else is going to still, like you're abandoning them, but you're still going to make sure they're covered. And then also like just, I don't know, I'm trying to think of any other example. I'm sure I could think of some. We don't even have time anyways. But if you are going to be abandoning your client, it needs to be done for a very, very, very good reason. And it should virtually never be happening, like very close to never. However, if you have a client who has, this is for forensic, if you have a client who has a probation violation and they return to incarceration and they're there for, I believe policy is, I heard recently it was 90 days. I thought it was 30, but if they're in there for a while, you might have to abandon them as a client, right? Like you don't want to keep them on your caseload, and also like they might be gone for years. You don't know what's going to happen. And so in that case, you're not really like setting them up to go elsewhere, because technically they're already elsewhere. You're just kind of like dropping them. You do get to obviously fill out your discharge paperwork, and so that's a good place to at least put the reason so that they could understand. But more than likely, they'll probably understand like, well, it's because I violated probation and I'm in jail. Let's see, conflicts of interest. You cannot terminate services with a client just so that you can pursue what would otherwise be a dual relationship. So like if you feel like you and your client are like becoming friends, first of all, that's a problem. Staff that, talk to someone, explain that, and get that cleared up. But definitely don't like discharge them as a client so that you can be friends with them. Don't like come up with a business idea with the client and then discharge them as a client so you can become business partners. Like that's a conflict of interest, and you don't fix a conflict of interest by making them no longer a client. That's highly unethical. Um, let's see, if you're leaving your employment setting, you need to be letting the client know like as early as possible, so that you can figure out like, are they going to refer to someone else? Are they going to stop treatment, which is not an option with mandated clients? What are they going to do when you leave? And then making sure it is like appropriately set up for the client. So it is, even if you're like fully quitting your job, like it is your responsibility. These guys are counting on you. It's your responsibility to make sure that they know all of their options and that they can make the decision and just not be like left in the dust while you leave and they don't know what's happening. So don't quit on the spot. And I guess if you do, at least make sure you still work that part out. Informed consent is something that it's I think more common in like research settings, but in clinical settings, this is going to be mostly covered at orientation. So they need to be kind of made aware of like what the services are. There's like this right to refuse concept. So what the services are, but also like that they don't have to take them if they don't want to. With mandated treatment, they do have the right to refuse. I always tell clients this, like, well, you're a free agent. No one can actually force you to sit in this chair and talk. But the alternative, right, is you're going to be incarcerated. So do they have the choice? Yeah, technically they do have the right to refuse, but it is sort of like they have a choice with a gun to their head, right? And I think it's our job to acknowledge that. I think it's our job to recognize that we're kind of the face of that. And so for them, it does kind of seem like we're holding them there. And that's really not the case. But sometimes you're just going to have to deal with the fact that you're the face of that problem and let them be a little bit mad. So yeah, right to refuse is they can choose not to attend if they don't want to. Again, like most of this stuff will be covered in orientation. But I still always, and you should too, go through the orientation packet with the client in our very first one-on-one session to make sure they understood everything. Because similar to this presentation, it goes quickly and a lot is said. And so you want to make sure that they understand all of it. That was actually one of those like, are we acting unethically questions? Assuming that they understand and not going through it with them is unethical because you don't know for sure that they have informed consent in what they're doing. The same way that you don't know for sure that your client's wife knows about his charge unless he tells you. You don't know for sure that they have informed consent unless you give them all of this. And then there are just like various policies that are obviously worth knowing. If a client's illiterate and or there's a language barrier, it's your job to make sure that there's a way for them to understand all these forms, everything they're filling out. If your client's in some way incapacitated, I'll use the example of dementia just because I live with a woman who has dementia. I could trick her so easily if I wanted. One time I jokingly told her like, we should sell your house and buy $150,000 worth of chocolate. And she said, that's a good idea. And yeah, I mean, easily could trick her, right? So if you have a person who's incapacitated and you use that to your advantage, you're not only breaking the law, but also acting unethically and also very much breaking the law. But they might have somebody who's like what's it called? A guardian or like a power of attorney. If that's where you're going to go with things, like if they seem to have kind of an incapacitation, um, proceed with caution. Make sure you're consulting with legal. Don't accept just like any document off the street where someone's saying that they're a guardian. I promise you, people try to take advantage of people in those positions, and you don't want to be the reason that they're successful in doing that. Tech policies. You got to be careful with who you allow to use technology services, so like telehealth. If you have a guy who's been in prison for 15 years who's like never used the internet in the way that it exists today, you shouldn't be like offering them telehealth. Like they're going to struggle so much. I remember one time I had a client assigned to me who was like 80 years old and like had been in prison for I don't even know, like forever. And so he had no idea how to use the internet. Our first two sessions were just like us trying to get him to use the internet. And I was like, nope, this can't happen. Like, we got to find a way to meet in person because it's just obviously not going to work. He's not going to get anything out of that. And then I'm going through these super quickly, so hopefully you're pausing and taking notes and or listening really well. Recording the client. I have two clients that I record for my supervisor to listen to so that I can have like direct supervision hours. And they know that I'm recording. They've given me permission to record. They know why I'm recording. They know that it's going to go to my supervisor. Like they know everything. They have been informed and have provided consent. Um, and then lastly, I'll talk about like electronic searches. So definitely don't look your clients up on social media. They're not consenting to you knowing like that side of them. But also like they might come up, right? Like people you may know, just block them and move on. And really like don't bring that up in session unless there's like um, a clinically significant reason for you to be bringing that up. Other than that, like you shouldn't be bringing it up. They don't need to know. They don't need to get self-conscious about it. One exception with forensic clients, as far as electronic searches go, would be PSIs and registry information. Like I look up a PSI before I even meet the client for the first time. I do try to give them a chance to kind of explain their case to me, and like I try to not read it, but I have had clients where like they're transferred to me and people have told me like, hey, this guy's like particularly risky for this reason. And I'm like, well, I should probably get familiar with his case before he has a chance to manipulate me. So sometimes you're going to be reading that without their knowledge ahead of time, and you're allowed to do that. Like the PSI is, I mean, assuming you acquire it legally, it's acceptable. But I would say be careful. Like make sure you're at least honoring the client and their knowledge that you're doing that. Like at the very least, they should be made aware. And then the registry, like I do look my clients up on the registry just so I can like copy paste the name of their charge. But I don't like go through their list of like tattoos and all this other stuff. I think that they're already ashamed and embarrassed enough of that profile that they have that like I don't need to make that worse. Like I can talk to them about it without even bringing up the registry for the most part. If they bring it up, obviously we talk about it, but like I don't have any good reason to remind them that they are wildly searchable by general society. So, next slide. Privacy and confidentiality. This is one that so this is where that like part 2 thing comes in. So like you could reject a subpoena. That's where this comes in, or this is where that comes in rather. Um, Confidentiality, theoretically, it should just be like, don't say anything. Like, don't tell anybody anything about your client. Especially, and I said this already, but especially when you're working with forensic clients, like their criminal history is kind of a fingerprint in some cases. Some people have very general, records, so it's not that serious. But um, yeah, if you start discussing too much about their crime, you could potentially be exposing their identity. Um, and then let's see. So as far as like who you can disclose client information to, it's basically no one. There was something on the NASW that said like even if it's so obvious that the person already knows the client is there, like if they call you and they have like your phone number that they got from the client, it's like, yeah, obviously they know. It doesn't matter. You can't say anything unless you have a release of information. You keep your mouth zipped. And you don't want to say like, oh no, not anymore, right? Like, or, he's not a client here anymore or anything like that. No matter what it is, no matter what they're asking, if you don't have a release of information, you say, I can neither confirm nor deny that any person is here or has received services at our agency. So any person is here or has received services. That way you're not saying like, I don't know that guy. You're saying like, I can't confirm anyone, not only him, but literally no one. Um, and then, I mean, we all know that there's obviously the mandated reporting caveat here. If they're an imminent threat to their self or someone else, you do have reporting duties. If there is something else that goes against confidentiality that you feel like you need to report, check with a lawyer. Like don't just go and do what you think you're supposed to do. Make sure you're consulting with at least other people on staff, probably a lawyer, if it's anything beyond those like general obvious ones. Um, oh yeah, this is okay. there was an example that was given to me, well, to the team in a professional development meeting, about a guy who he like wanted to beat up a CO, I think, but he knew that he could like wait till he got out to beat him up, and then I don't know, like be more successful at beating him up. And it feels on the surface like originally it feels like, oh, I need to report that he's a danger to that guy. But he's not really, right? Like he's already made the decision not to do it right now. So you have the time to like work with him on that. So you wouldn't report that, even though it feels like, oh my God, that guy's in danger. He's not, at least not for a while, right? Not until this guy gets out. So it's not imminent. Um, and then past abuse victims are definitely an interesting one when you're doing mandated treatment with people on the registry. We like actively tell them not to give us enough information because we don't want to report it. We need their trust and we need them to be honest for the polygraph. And so don't report a past abuse that you don't have enough information to report. And also don't ask for enough information to report an abuse. In fact, like encourage them strongly against it. You don't want to. And I would say, okay, so I accidentally skipped to this slide in the middle of my sentence on the last one, and I don't know how to go back without losing everything I said on the last one. But basically, the thing I said last before I would come to this slide naturally was that if you are going to be reporting a past abuse as a result of a polygraph disclosure, make sure you're consulting at the very least with someone on staff, but possibly even legal depending on the situation, because you are potentially violating that client's Fifth Amendment. And that's a big deal. So you don't want to do that. And we don't want to anyways. Like I can't help my client if they're in jail. I can't help my client who's behind bars. So just, you know, you don't want to report them anyways, but if you feel like you have to, make sure you are consulting with someone first. So that was the end of that other slide. On this one, this is this policy law called 42 CFR Part 2, which is just Part 2. They call it Part 2, and it's in place to protect substance users so that they can feel comfortable being honest in treatment. And anybody who, any clinic who offers substance use treatment and accepts Medicaid is subject to this law. So, I mean, more than likely, like especially if you're in a forensic clinic, like more than likely that applies to you. Offering substance use and accepting Medicaid, automatically you're subject to this. There are other possible ways that you'd end up being subject to this, so don't like exclude yourself solely on that. But I would guess that those two things apply to pretty much every forensic therapy. So here's where there becomes like a limitation. Is it on this slide? It's got to be on a different slide, but you can actually reject a subpoena. Oh, it's on the slide about legal. You can reject a subpoena. Like you can't just like call and say no. You have to like file paperwork. And that's the case with like any subpoena. But when you're talking about subpoenas with substance use clients, you actually need way more than a subpoena. So you still have to file the correct paperwork to reject it. But it's like as long as you're filing the correct paperwork, you're going to successfully reject it, which is going to be in your client's best interest because you don't want to disclose client information to literally anyone. So the reason you can reject it is, at least as it relates to Part 2, is it can't be like a subpoena or a warrant or whatever. It has to be what's called a specific court order, a special court order. And this is something that's like signed by a judge. It's like its own specific process. It's not just like something anybody can go get. And it has to go through a lot of channels to make sure that the information they're requesting is absolutely necessary, and like that it's going through what they call the least intrusive means. So session notes are considered like highly intrusive, and courts don't want to request those if they don't need to. And frankly, like they shouldn't have them if they don't absolutely need them. The exceptions to Part 2, we do have mandated reporting situations. So like same thing, not imminent risk. If a client is putting themselves or someone else in imminent danger, you can report that. You don't necessarily need to include that they have a substance use problem in that report, but if it's relevant, obviously do. You have another exception of medical emergencies. So the example that was given is if a person has a cocaine use disorder and they have chest pain, you may need to intervene and involve like medical services. And at that point, you can inform them that the client has a cocaine use disorder. They're actually also going to be subject to part two. So you're kind of in the clear in that regard. But do keep in mind, like, you don't need to tell everyone, right? Like, you need to tell the people who are medically responding to the client, but you don't need to like tell every single person who's part of this emergency. I always say, like heroin overdoses or any kind of opiate overdoses, if you're going to be using naloxone, hopefully you already know this, but you should be still calling the police to get them involved. You don't tell the police that they are on heroin. Like, call and just say they're not responsive. This is how you're trained when you get naloxone training. Call and say that they're not responsive. Like, don't disclose the substance use, because part of living in such a garbage bullshit society is that if they know that the client's like got a heroin problem, they're not going to prioritize that call. But if they know that it's just someone and they're unresponsive, they are going to prioritize that call. And so, yeah, I mean, you have to kind of keep your toes on, that's not a phrase, keep your head on straight, keep your wits about you. You have to be aware of what you're saying and who you're saying it to as it relates to your clients. And then, yeah, just making sure that if it's a substance client, oh, sorry, there's a couple more exceptions. I just decided to move on even though it's not time. Wow, we're almost done here, guys. Pre-established consent, so already having a release of information, definitely AP&P would be one of those if you're working at least with sex offense clients. And then if you feel like you need to disclose something, you can actually request a court order. You can't disclose it without the court order, but you could be the one to request it. So if there is something where you think it's absolutely necessary, request a court order. I would say get legal involved if you're going to do that. But don't just like give it away because you think it's necessary. Best to consult with staff. I'm just making sure I read all of this. Nope, we're good. Okay. Okay, next up we have HIPAA. I'm going to kind of run under the assumption that everyone knows what HIPAA is, just for the sake of time. But basically, right, it's the reason you can't disclose anything because you are a health care facility and you're providing health services, so you're subject to HIPAA. I do want to talk specifically, though, about how HIPAA works when you are having to disclose information. So there's two things to consider when you are intentionally and legally disclosing information. One is the purpose test is what they call it, and the other is minimum necessary information. So with the purpose test, it's like, am I accessing this information under appropriate means or for appropriate reasons? So if you're a person in billing, am I, just looking at the client's like name and general information and their bill? Yes, okay, you're good. If you're a person in billing and you're like reading session notes out of curiosity, like your purpose is definitely not in a good place. And then the minimum necessary information is like, just as like an example, let's say your client is trying to prove that they were in therapy on a specific day at a specific time because they're being accused of something that's like they didn't do it and they were there. You can provide just like your session notes, like day and time, right? You don't have to provide like the whole history of the client and all of this stuff. You can just provide that, like, yeah, they were here, they had a session, I was with them. Period. Zip your lips. Minimum necessary information. That's all you have to disclose. And then I kind of said this on the other one, but like when courts are requesting information, they also want like minimum necessary information. They recognize that violating HIPAA, even for like good reason, is a pretty big deal. And so they're going to take like the least intrusive means, which would be in most cases not a clinical session note. If they've gotten to the stage where they're requesting a clinical session note, like you do have to provide that, and they will make sure that they get what they need. Let's see. And then also, and this is this goes out to like the business owners. To some extent, you are actually responsible for this. And if there is a HIPAA violation, you are potentially the one on the line for it, even if it was one of your employees. If there is sufficient evidence that you don't have like good systems in place, then you do run the risk of being the one who's liable for HIPAA violations. So, for example, like if you don't require that client information be stored as like first initial last name, if you don't like check in on that and make sure you're enforcing it, you could potentially be the one on the line for that. So definitely keep that in mind. You're also required to provide some kind of secure disposal for documents. So whether that's making sure your clinic has a shredder, or making sure your clinic has like a subscription to one of those shredder companies. Making sure that people are like required to have strong passwords, like putting it in the settings, anything like that. That's up to the owner, or the, I guess, whoever's like the responsible party for the organization. Um, and then as far as like reporting, if you accidentally violate HIPAA and or become aware of someone else's violation of HIPAA, few things to not do. Don't try to just undo it. Like, don't try to like backtrack and like cover your tracks. But like, don't do that. Okay, just report it. Don't go ask colleagues about it. Don't go like, try to get someone to tell you don't have to or whatever. Just report it. Don't contact the client independently. Like, whoever ends up telling the client, this needs to go through like a chain of decisions. So the client shouldn't just be called immediately like, hey, I accidentally said your name out loud. There's a chain. There's a means of handling this, and typically you're not even going to be the one doing that. It's going to go to like a compliance officer. And then lastly, and I would say most importantly, don't delete evidence. Like, just because you messed up doesn't mean that you just like delete it and cover your tracks. Keep the evidence so that you can demonstrate, yes, this happened, but I wasn't acting unethically, like it was just an accident. We work in a human field. We work in a field that recognizes that humans make accidents, make mistakes. And so don't try to cover it. It's just going to make it worse. And then on this slide, you'll see there's just this, like, I think if I do, there's like a tool for this. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's like this chain that you're going to follow. So if you either violate or discover a violation of HIPAA, you should be immediately reporting it to your supervisor. And that might be the end of the line for you. Like, they're the ones that's going to take it to, the privacy officer or whoever they are like assigned to take it to. And if you're a supervisor, your job would be to take it to your guys's like internal privacy officer, and then they would potentially do an investigation. They would decide what needs to happen, and then potentially report it to an external privacy officer, depending just on the circumstances. So make sure you're following the chain of command. Make sure you're not trying to cover your tracks. Okay, and then as I had said before, I'm going to go through the remaining standards. Those are all your responsibilities to the client. And you have kind of a lot, right? You have a lot of responsibilities to your colleagues and all these other kind of stakeholders too. And they're not less important. They're just less complicated. So I'm just going to go through them kind of quickly. We also are like, we're short on time, I promise. Respect, you obviously all of your colleagues respect. Don't disparage them. Even if you don't like them, just like don't talk to them unless it's about a client. You don't have to be BFFs with any of your coworkers, but you also don't have to be enemies with any of your coworkers. You can dislike them and disagree with them and still just like not cause problems. Confidentiality, if a coworker comes to you with like a problem that they're experiencing, probably don't tell anyone else, right? Don't spread that around the office. If they came to you in confidence, let them talk to you in confidence. Like, you're a therapist, you should be able to keep secrets. Interdisciplinary collaborations. This is like interdisciplinary, so not like amongst two staff members, but amongst like maybe, for example, you and a probation officer, or you and like, I don't know, the judge or justice system in general. With forensic clients, I would say a big thing with interdisciplinary collaboration is making sure you're not seeing triangulation. So like anything they tell you, kind of checking it with the PO, definitely before like making decisions. And then the other thing, and this isn't really interdisciplinary, but it is still your relationship with the colleague, is like, I said this earlier, like myself and a coworker are a treatment team for like my individual client, their group client, right? It's the same person. We're a treatment team. We need to get along at the very least. We don't have to like each other, but we do need to get along. And so what this means is that when you do have disputes amongst each other, yourself and your colleague, do not engage the client in that, and don't like make it a work thing. Don't try to like get a client to believe one way or another about your colleague. Don't do any of that kind of stuff. keep it between you guys, right? And then let's see, your POs kind of, they do count as colleagues in some regard. And so just making sure that POs also feel respected, also like are given the same level of confidentiality, and then keeping a good relationship with them, which I definitely already talked about as far as like human relationships go. If you are consulting with someone, if you're using a colleague for consultation purposes, you still have to maintain confidentiality for the client. So like, don't go to your colleague and be like, hey, John Smith's like really having all these problems. Just say like, my client is having these problems. And again, make sure you're doing it in a way where it's like they can't be identified, and definitely can't be identified for anybody who's not on their treatment team. Next slide, going. Okay, sorry, that was scary. I thought I deleted all of my audio and video, and I don't know what I would have done. I would have just had a full panic, I think. I'm going to go through the rest of this really quickly. I looked at the time when that happened, and I realized like we only have 37 minutes and we still have kind of a lot of slides. So I'm going to go quickly. So you have responsibilities to your colleagues. Don't have sex with your colleagues. Don't sexually harass your colleagues. You don't want to do that because it's bad, but also like it could create kind of a lot of uncomfortable scenarios for the client. And that's obviously not going to be in the client's best interest. I will say that I think it's important to limit your friendships in a clinical setting as well, like not being friends with your coworkers in like a way that could have fallouts, because that's also not going to be good for the client. And then on this slide, I think just look at it for a second. So it's got impairment of colleagues, incompetence of colleagues, and then unethical conduct of colleagues. In all three of those cases, the first thing you do is talk to the colleague. They might not realize that they're like messing up. They might not realize that there's a problem. And so just going straight to like your supervisor or something, that's completely unnecessary. So I will actually talk about that more when we talk about reporting, but there is a chain and it starts with the colleague. Okay, and then in practice settings, so this is actually not so much to the clinician as it is to the like owner and the supervisors. So supervisors should not be having friendships with the people that they're supervising. They should be treating all of their subordinates equally, fair and respectfully. If you are a supervisor, you should have the appropriate education and training to be a supervisor. Don't supervise people if you're not like licensed and appropriately educated to do so. And then if you are like a student, like an intern, your clients should know that. Like they need to know that it's part of informed consent. And so as a supervisor, you have a responsibility to make sure your supervisees clients know that. So make sure they know. And then in mandated treatment, like obviously clients don't really have the same kind of choice to change clinicians, but at least giving them the awareness of who their clinician is and like where their kind of current level is at. It's your ethical responsibility to make sure they know. To the managers, supervisors, performance evaluations, clinicians should know the goalposts in advance, and they should be graded on whether they are reaching those goalposts or not. You should be fair and consistent in what you're expecting of your supervisees, meaning it should be across the board that you have the same expectations for everyone. And then in your performance evaluations, you should be objectively basing your evaluation on whether or not they hit the goalpost that you've objectively stated in advance. Let's see, client records. So if you're an owner or supervisor, it is actually your ethical responsibility to make sure client records are accurate. If fraud is discovered in your clinic, and especially if you knew about it, you're equally on the line, like 100%. Especially if you knew about it, you are on the line for that. And so making sure that if you do see fraud happening, that you're saying something that's like the clinician's job, or I'm sorry, it's not it is a clinician's job also, but it's the owner's job, supervisor's job to make sure it's being handled correctly. Documentation stuff I'll talk about in a second as far as client records, but one thing is like if you are the owner, when you have clients discharge, you need to make sure that the clinicians are aware of code as far as maintaining the clients. So you have to keep client files for a minimum of 7 years, unless they're a minor, in which case you keep it until they're 18 and then 4 more years. So until they're 22. So 18 plus 4 years and or 7 years, depending on the client's age. That's Utah code. I don't know if it's different elsewhere, but that is Utah code. And then billing, make sure you're giving clients what they pay for. If they're coming in to get therapy and you're shooting the breeze with them for 50 minutes, like you're not giving them therapy, and that billing is completely unfair. I'd like you to consider what your life would be like if you made $8 an hour and you have to pay $120 a week for treatment. And accounting for taxes, that means you have to work 16 hours. If you make $8 an hour, you have to work 16 hours every week to afford therapy. So, like, nearly half of your paycheck is going to therapy. Make it good, make it count, make it something they feel good about paying for. Next slide. Okay. So this one is more on the practice setting stuff, and a lot of this stuff is also to the more the owners and the supervisors. I'm going to skip the stuff about client transfer because we kind of already talked about that with the referral thing. But administration, it is your admin's job. So to the clinician, it's your admin's job. To admin and supervisors, it's your job to make sure that your employees have all the resources that they need. And so part of this could be I don't know, printer, paper, and ink. It could be like a company car, like depending on, how serious we're talking. But it's your job. It's your job as the owner or, supervisor to make sure that this is available. So if you have a printer that's like garbage, and you've tried replacing it 3 times, I don't know what to tell you, but same. Um, let's see. And then eliminating conditions that go against ethics. So you're responsible for resources and conditions. Yeah, resources and conditions. So the resources being the printer, the paper, etc. Conditions being like if there is unethical stuff happening in your clinic, you have a responsibility to eliminate that. And again, I know I already said this, but it's pretty important. Ethically speaking, you're on the line if your clinicians are going against policy and you're aware of it. Admin also has a responsibility to offer or at least encourage continuing education and staff development. This doesn't necessarily mean that they have to provide it, like pay for it for you, but they do need to like they need to provide trainings and like professional development offer. Wow, at the 2.5 hour mark, I stopped being able to speak clearly. They need your employer should be offering you like the chance of professional development within the company. They should be allowing you to take time off for CEUs if you need to, and then they should be educating you about opportunities for CEUs. But it's not necessarily like a financial responsibility on their part. A good example is like the sex offense task force meetings. Your employer needs to be letting you know about them, but they don't. Those are free, which is nice, but there could be something else they don't need to pay for them. Sometimes they get them for free, which is nice, but it's not something that they're required to pay for, just something they're required to like educate you about. Keep in mind if you are going to be friends with your employees that you're going to put yourself into hot water. Keep in mind if you're going to be friends with your boss that you're going to put yourself in hot water. I will say, like, no matter what your relationship is with your clinicians, no matter what your relationship is with your boss, no matter what your relationship is with your colleagues and your supervisor or anybody, none of this supersedes ethical code. At the end of the day, no matter how good of friends you are with someone, if you see something, you have to say something or you will also be ethically culpable. If there is a labor or management dispute and or if you want to go on strike, you need to make sure that the best interest of the client is still put first. So that is obviously complicated if you're like going on strike and still having to find a way to have sessions or at least be there for your client. It can get complicated. I would say do more research if you're in that situation. But keep in mind that at the end of the day, no matter what you're upset with your boss about, the client's best interest is top priority. Okay, we already talked about competence, so I'm not really going to say much about that. Discrimination, I'll just say don't. there's nobody you should be discriminating against. We're all people and we all are doing our best out here. And especially when you're working with pejoratively sex offenders and drug addicts, you have to see the person in front of you. But we already talked a lot about this and we are really running out of time. But this one, a really important one on this one is the way that you conduct yourself in private. I always use this example and I don't know why, but like you don't want to be at a bar on your off time with your friends, getting absolutely fucking hammered and a client sees you or a PO sees you, right? You don't want that. That's like you are in your personal life and you are in private in some way. But that's still, they're not going to care. That's their therapist right there. That's their colleague right there. Like that's what they're going to see. And so like making sure that even when you feel like you're not like on, that you're still kind of on, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're like viewed differently because you weren't handling yourself appropriately in public. um let's see, impairment we already talked about on the last slide. Making sure that you're reporting it to the clinician first, and then on your own impairment, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I think you have a problem, being kind of humble enough to accept that. If you have your own mental health condition, making sure that you can handle that and show up for your clients at the same time. If you can't do that, then maybe offering your clients referrals or in some way like transferring them out, so that you can focus on yourself. Because again, like especially with high risk populations, that self care is the most important. Um, and then obviously seeking consultation like all the time. Like you should consult about everything, talk to people about everything, making sure that if you are not sure, like if it's a situation you've never been in before, ask. If it's a situation that seems like kind of gray, ask. Um, and then I am going to genuinely just skip some of these. Not all of them are like really hot topics and we just genuinely don't have time. I told Jeff like I could easily record 9 hours on this topic. There is so much that could be said, but he only wanted 3, so proceeding. Um, to the social work profession, obviously maintain high standards. Everything we've talked about today, do that. Um, research I think is an interesting one that's worth talking about. It's not obviously the same as like clinical work, but it is something that still requires like integrity and that you follow appropriate guidelines. So like if you are, you have access to a lot of sex offenders and there's not a ton of sex offender research out there. So you may want to do research on them, but making sure you're following appropriate IRB guidelines. So that's that informed consent, right to withdraw. And they don't have right to withdraw with treatment, but they do have that with research. Obviously not causing any harm, offering them anonymity and confidentiality, and then reporting your findings accurately, even if you were proven wrong, and then avoiding conflicts of interest. So this one I think is, again, like equally important, but not super complicated. Like just act ethically and make sure if you're doing research that you do it correctly. I'm going to move on. We are going so fast now. Social welfare, you should be promoting the general welfare of society. And again, like friendly reminder, this gets kind of murky when you're working with sex offenders and drug addicts, but it is still in your in your client's best interest for you to be primarily tasked with their well-being. And making sure that they can't harm society or themselves. Let's see, public participation. This one is, I think, in my opinion, sorry, I'm trying to pull up to see if my next slide is what I think it is. It is. Public participation. This would be, like I already talked about this, like my dermatologist, I like changed his mind about sex offenders. So that would be a big part of it. And then another part would be like engaging the community. If you can offer like free classes or like attending like local meetings, what are the town hall meetings, anything like that. Would be great. And then if there is like a public emergency, offering like mental health crisis services, that kind of thing. And then always kind of pushing socially and politically for equal access and equal opportunity for everyone. So the next slide is, I think, a really good example of educating the public. This woman here, I'll go to the next slide. This woman, golly, I wish I could. I think her name's Riley. She take this QR code or like write down this link, whatever you need to do. This woman does this amazing thing where she offers free, totally free naloxone courses that take 1 hour, and she sends you 2 free doses of naloxone. they mail them to you, and a sticker for your car. 2 free doses of naloxone in exchange for an hour of your time. She does the training on the naloxone, and then they are completely free. To be clear, the 1 hour that you would spend on that has nothing to do with the CEU. It will not provide you with any additional credit for this CEU. I don't think she offers like a certificate or anything, so it's not like it's not involved with this. It's in no way associated with this. But it's so near and dear to my heart. I think the more doses of naloxone you can get out into the community, the more lives you can save all around. So take this, take it. It's 1 hour of your time. That she schedules them in advance. You'll know. I did ask her if she'd be willing to just do like a whole thing for the company, but she said no. She said that it's just as many people as can attend at any given time. But it's 1 hour, and it's absolutely worth it. So hopefully you got that. If you didn't, pause. Here we go. Okay, legal ethics. We already talked about the difference between a subpoena and a court order. That's just a law that you could reference if you're curious. But if it's not an official court order, do not release it if they have any kind of substance use problem. And then I assume that everybody already knows this, but there is a difference between your session notes and your personal notes. Session notes obviously are like the objective progress of the client, right? Personal notes are like your thoughts, things you feel like you're recognizing. If you're doing kind of like a psychoanalysis, like keeping that tracked, right? That's going to be your personal notes. It's not the same as your session notes. Those are yours, and they are, widely speaking, not subpoenaable. So keep that in mind, keep them close to the chest, and keep your personal notes as where you're keeping most of like this information. Then I already talked about the least intrusive means, like they're just going to ask you for like the session date and time. They're not necessarily going to ask you for like the full note. They might need to, like depending on what it says, but they are always going to take the least intrusive amount of information possible. Testifying, when you work with forensic clients, just by default and nature of the job, you are so much more likely to end up in a courtroom. So make sure when you do that you're consulting with legal like a lot, and make sure that you're not saying more than you absolutely have to. And also like make sure the client's aware of it like every step of the way. If you work with pre-trial clients, and I will say that at the present time, I can only confidently say that this applies to Alpha Counseling. I don't know if it applies to other clinics. But if you work with pretrial clients, they're still going through the court system. Sometimes they're voluntarily coming to treatment just because they know they have a problem. Sometimes their lawyer is like, hey, like it'd be a good idea for you to go to treatment. It's going to look good. But keep in mind, like they don't have a PO yet. They have their lawyer. That's who you tend to be reporting to. I kind of consulted with a in-house clinician about this, and he said you're just reporting to the lawyer since they don't have a PO. The lawyer is receiving their mental health assessment and their quarterly reports, and one thing is that like by nature of the fact that they're pretrial, you have less and want less information about their case. You don't want to have to testify about something that they've told you. So kind of avoiding talking too much about their case. And as I understand it, at least with Alpha Counseling, pretrial clients are kind of limited to groups. And I do assume it's probably so that they're not speaking as much about their case. Okay, this is documentation. This is what I had said we would get to. So documentation is one of the most important parts of your job. One, you can't get your paycheck without it, but two, your clients can't get their covered. um, Insurance will deny claims if your notes are insufficient or take too long. Your notes need to have what we call kind of the golden thread, where it's like you're addressing the diagnosis like all through everything. So their mental health assessment, their quarterly reports, your session notes, like everything should be addressing that diagnosis. And if it's not, your notes are going to be rejected. And also if they take too long to get, some insurance companies say 90 days, some give you a year. Most company policies are within that same day that you need to have your notes in. But making sure that they're timely is very important. I will say like the best way I've found to like know what to put in a note is I want to assume that I may have to look back on it one day and know what I was talking about while still minimizing the amount of information that I'm providing because of confidentiality, right? So finding a way that you could read it and go like, yeah, I remember that day, but still be the one who gets to recall it. Like, don't have it all written in the note. I would say if you don't know with documentation like necessarily what to do, reach out to like someone on staff who's been there for a while and they'll probably be able to help you. I know internally we have like a note coach training thing that's kind of coming up. I guess if you watch this anytime after January of 2026, it won't necessarily be coming up anymore. But anyways, get note training if you need it, because if you don't do your notes accurately, your client's claims can be denied, and then they're going to end up self-pay for something they thought was covered by insurance. Um, and then as far as like having your session notes in like same day and pretty much immediately, keep in mind like you are doing a 50-minute hour. I tell clients this on our first session every single time. I say, I know it's 1 hour, but it's actually a 50-minute hour. I always just tell them like if I use that 10 minutes to do all of your casework, one, I'm going to do a better job for you. And two, I'm not going to have to go home and work for the rest of the evening doing session notes for my clients. And I always say like, because I ain't trying to work for free. And they're like, I hear ya. Like they get it. Like they don't want you to work for free either. So do the 50-minute hour. I know sometimes it's still going to go over that. Even when it does, like you can be a couple minutes late for the next client. Like they're going to be fine. You've sat in a doctor's office and had the doctor come out a little late and been slightly annoyed, but otherwise fine. They're going to be fine. Don't do it every single time, obviously, but like it just happens sometimes and that's okay. Um, I think that's enough on notes. Oh, concurrent documentation. I'll admit that I'm not good at this. I feel like it's kind of a good thing that I'm not, because I'm like so engaged with the client that I forget about it. Um, but I do have the 10 minutes and I feel like I do just fine with the 10 minutes afterwards. But I do know it's like highly recommended that you do concurrent documentation. So you're like typing as the client's talking. If you're going to do this, one, it takes practice, accept that it takes practice. And two, have the client involved in it. Like make sure they know what you're typing so they don't think you're just like ignoring them while they talk and you're just typing away, right? Like make sure they know what you're doing, make sure they know what you're saying. And that's actually another thing, like their documentation is theirs. You owe it to them. If a client requests their documentation, you provide that to them. It's absolutely theirs. And you aren't allowed to reject that request. So make sure it's good enough that if they request it, you would feel comfortable with what they're going to see. Telehealth ethics. I kind of already touched on this, at least as far as the benefit of more access. There's also the benefit of working from home, right? Like you as the clinician, it's kind of nice to sit in your pajamas all day and just put on a nice shirt. But I would say that that's not in the client's best interest, because if you're too comfortable, you're not going to do a very good job. I do want to share a story right here just to talk about kind of the downside of telehealth. I had a client who, long story short, just because I don't have the time, he was talking, we're telehealth. I'm like looking at him, but it is a screen, and I think I have pretty high quality equipment, but it's still a screen. And he said, you can probably see that I'm tearing up a little bit. No, I couldn't. No, I couldn't. I'm so glad he told me, because then we could talk about it. But like it's just different. Like in person, if a client's eyes kind of start tearing up, like you can tell, you can see it. But it's just not the same when you're or when you're on telehealth. You do kind of miss those like really subtle cues. That was the moment I decided to switch to in person. I'm currently in the transition of whenever a telehealth client graduates, replacing them with an in-person client. I also offered in-person to all my clients, and a couple of them took me up on it. A couple of them thought it would be more personable, and I agree. Risks of telehealth. There is less accountability. Like you could have a client who, reeks of booze and you would have no idea. You also would struggle more, or do struggle more with like how they're presenting. Like you wouldn't know if the client was, particularly odorous if they're over a computer. So you wouldn't know to say that they're, potentially having like hygiene problems. And then also I think if you have like these kind of manipulative clients and they know that you're not picking up on as much, they're going to take advantage of that. So there are like, I would say risks, especially with forensic populations, as far as like manipulation, distraction, accountability, and then with any population, like just not getting as much like human connection out of the situation. Fraud. Okay, this is, I've been talking about this a lot and just repeatedly saying there's a fraud slide, there's a fraud slide. So here we are, the fraud slide. Um, this quote that's on here, it's actually from the integrity slide, like 20 slides ago. And the reason I include it is because a person who is committing fraud is not a person who is acting through integrity. It's just not happening. I want to say a couple of things. One, fraud's bad, like I'll just say that. But I want to kind of offer 3 reasons that you shouldn't be committing fraud. And I guess actually before I provide those, I'd want to say too that like there are obviously varying levels of fraud. So there's like, fully like logging a session that never happened, or saying something happened that never happened. And then there's also just like checking out 5, 7 minutes early and not putting in your session note that you did. They're both fraud, right? Those are both fraudulent activities. Just because one's on the lower end of the spectrum doesn't mean that it's not fraud. It's still fraud. Um, but let me kind of paint 3 reasons to hopefully convince you to not commit fraud, particularly when we are working with forensic clients. So the first would be, and this would apply to any kind of clinic, this person needs you. Like this person needs you to be doing a good job. They're relying on you to like, I don't know, adequately show up in the relationship. Like they are in the vulnerable position in the relationship. And if you really want to be able to help them, you have to be acting in integrity. We already talked about this, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but you owe it to them. Okay. A second reason, and this would be for the less altruistic folks out there, is that your license is on the line, right? Like if you commit fraud, I don't know about you, but I have $100,000 in student loan debt, and if I commit fraud, now I have $100,000 in student loan debt and no license, so I'm gonna end up going back to the call center I worked at before this. Like fraud's not worth it. And again, this is any fraud. If it falls on the fraud spectrum, even if it's that low level fraud, it's still fraud. You could still lose your license for it. And then 3, and this one is really particular to forensic clients. If you have a client, I'm going to say this very seriously. If you have a client who reoffends and they go to court and they say like, "Yo, man, like you were in treatment this whole time. Like why did you have this problem?" And they say, "Well, I only saw my therapist for like 10 or 15 minutes a week," or, I don't know. I mean, I would go to group and like the clinician was just like shooting the shit for 20 minutes and then sending us home. I don't feel like I was really learning anything. Whatever, like if you have that happening, and they reoffend, one, your ass is on the line, and two, they have a new victim. Like in what I'm describing, the situation that I'm describing, they have a new victim. And I said this at the very beginning. They make their own choices. They're the ones who decided that, right? But in some regard, you are culpable. And I know that doesn't feel good, but like if you're not doing therapy and you're not giving them the skills that they need, and you're just, kind of checking in and checking out, basically, like you have some level of culpability in that because you've taken on the responsibility that society is expecting from you, to do a good job with these clients. And them having a new victim, I mean, it's so hard to say without just being like blaming you, because I'm not. But it is sort of on you, and you kind of would have to have that on your conscience. And so I mean, there are a lot of reasons not to commit fraud, but when you're working with sex offenders, for me, that would be one of the number one reasons. Um, Okay, so whenever we hear fraud, we always hear, of course, fraud, waste, and abuse. Um, Waste, financial waste, that'd be wasting their money. I already talked about this, like them having to work 16 hours a week to see you. Don't waste that. Like they have so little already. And so, if they're already destitute and then they come to you and they're just paying you to talk shit for 20 minutes, that's just simply not cool. Don't waste their time. So like repeatedly revisiting the same problem and not really having any forward momentum, that's definitely, that's a waste of their time. And then, especially with our forensic clients, like they are having to spend their time, oftentimes like to get here on the bus. It takes a lot for them to be able to get to this session. So when they get there, just don't make it a waste, right? And then Clinical waste, and I'm actually going to talk about this on the next slide, which is the one where you may want your DSM handy. Clinical waste would be like using too much treatment, even though they don't need it, like keeping them in treatment beyond what's necessary, or offering them the wrong kind of treatment that's like not helpful for them. And I'm going to talk about how that is weird with mandated populations because they're in mandated treatment, and you may think like this guy doesn't even need treatment, and you still have to keep him there. So how do you justify that, like legally and ethically speaking, as not waste? And I will explain that on the next slide. And then abuse, this would be the other thing. So working outside of your scope is a form of abuse, kind of like abuse of your license. If a client asks you to do something and you don't know, just say, I don't know. Just say, I don't know, but I can like try to find out and get back to you. Or I don't know, that's not something I'm trained in, but I can see if I can find someone who is. Yeah, don't work outside of your scope. Inaccurate notes. If you are intentionally leaving something out of your note to protect a client, one, you're probably being manipulated, and two, you are committing abuse as far as your license goes. And then the alternative, like saying something happened that didn't happen, that's also definitely abuse. It's also fraud. If you unintentionally leave something out, and you realize later, just add it later. Like if it's relevant to their care, you can just add it later. And then inflated notes would be if they're not making progress and you say that they are, just so that like you can make it seem like things are going well, that would be inflated notes. Picking a random thing they said and then making it into like if it's like a one-off sentence and then making that into like their progress or regression or something, like don't do that. And then this one, if you know, you know on this. With what I'm about to say, if you know, you know. If you don't, I don't know how to explain it. It actually happened in my group today. Some men, instead of saying like women, they say females. And if you know, you know. Um, they often don't mean anything by it. And so I'd like to encourage you to just view it almost as a cultural thing. You could use it as an opportunity to say, like, hey, when you say that, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but it might be off-putting to some people. Like, you could use it as a learning opportunity. But I've heard like women say that that's derogatory, and it comes across, if you know what I'm talking about, you do know it comes across as derogatory. But labeling it as derogatory, like immediately, that would be like an inflation of the reality of the situation. This might go slightly over 3 hours, and for that, I apologize. I am trying to talk as quickly as humanly possible. This would be the mandated treatment and waste. What I'll maybe invite you to do, just so for the sake of time, is pause this or come back to it when you have a minute and get your DSM and look at it. So I've got some notes on the DSM and I'll just use criterion A instead of going through all of them. But it's really common with mandated treatment to use adjustment disorder as the diagnosis, especially if they don't qualify for anything else. So that's actually, I mean, it's totally legitimate, right? Like, really what adjustment disorder boils down to is like they've got a big stressor going on and they're trying to get to the other side of it. And that is, I mean, they've got probation, right? They've got a big stressor and they're trying to get to the other side of it. So it is a justifiable diagnosis, but you have to justify it. Like, you shouldn't just be throwing this on every client. They might have like something else that's worth working on. So like criterion A in the DSM, and you can look at all of this on your own, but it's the development of emotional or behavioral symptoms in response to an identifiable stressor occurring within 3 months of the onset of the stressor. So this like fake client that I've put here, John's stressor is court and probation related. He says that his emotional symptoms started in the middle of the court process. So that means that he, started becoming really emotional about his life or whatever while he was in court. So court and probation are the identifiable stressors, and his emotional issues happened within 3 months of the onset of the stressor. So that is completely valid. And if a client is suffering, like, use that. It's absolutely valid. And then when you're tying that into your session notes, just use the word adjustment in your session notes sometimes, or not sometimes, every time, somewhere. I always just refer to it as their post-carceral adjustment. So like they are working on making their life better when they get out of the justice system. That'd be the post-carceral. And so if they like, fill out 10 job applications or something, like you can say, I put it on here, obtaining adequate employment is a necessary component of John's successful adjustment to his post-carceral life. So like filling out job applications, it is something that helps him long term, so it counts. Yeah, so pause it if you want to look at this more, but it is an absolutely valid diagnosis that does kind of help you avoid waste. And then just helping them get to a stage where it's like their life is better after probation because they came to therapy. Like that's the goal. We are so close, but really not there. Ethical decisions. What I'll say about this, so that I'm not just like beating a bunch of dead horses, is you will run into conflicts between policies sometimes, where like it seems like you don't want to, for example, like disclose something to a probation officer, but it's like state policy that you do, even though it's like social work policy that you don't disclose. You have to, because you have to follow like the stricter authority, which in this case would be APNP. They have more authority than just the code of ethics. And that's what it says: highest authority and greatest protection. So in order, let's see if I get this. In order, it goes your employer. This is from the bottom up. Your employer, the code of ethics, employer code of ethics. Oh man, I'm not gonna get it. We'll see. I may have written it down. Probably, hopefully. We don't have time for this, Kylie. What are you doing? Okay, we've got it. Your employer, the code of ethics, the courts, state law, federal law, in that order. So you're always going to follow the highest authority. So if federal law is on the table, it's always going to be the highest authority. And if your employer's policies are on the table, it's always going to be the lowest authority. So just for example, I'll use the APNP thing. Reporting to APNP, yes, it's a violation of the code of ethics because it violates the confidentiality code, but it's actually a state law that people who are on sex offense probation and are in currently court mandated sex offense treatment, that it's disclosed, like that violations are disclosed. So the state law supersedes the code of ethics because it's employer, code of ethics, court, state, federal. And since state is higher than the code of ethics, that's who you go with. And then the other one is the greatest protection, and this is for if they have the same level of authority, but they're conflicting laws. So a really good example of this is HIPAA and the Part 2. They're both federal laws, but in some cases you would ignore HIPAA and go with the Part 2 because you have a substance use client. So even though HIPAA would maybe have you disclose something, if Part 2 would have you not disclose it, then Part 2 has greater protection for the client. So you would follow that. So, and again, and I'll say this 1,000 times, when in doubt, consult, 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 consult. We are so close. Okay, this image, I know we don't even have time for me to tell you, but like ChatGPT does not understand how train tracks work. Like it's never seen train tracks or the trolley problem in its entire life. So these are just different. I'm not even going to get too much into this. This is more the philosophy nerd in me, and I don't want to waste your guys' time with it. But these are just different kinds of ways that people solve ethical dilemmas. So like utilitarianism is like the cost benefit analysis kind of thing. Deontology is like avoiding the most harm. So that was a lie. That's utilitarianism. Deontology is not intervening regardless of harm. I am going to lose my voice within the next 10 minutes. Anyways, we don't need to go into all of those. You can look them up if you're curious. The biggest thing, though, is resolving dilemmas through codified ethics. Like philosophy is fun, right? But you can't just use, like, it's fun to look at, but you can't use that when you need to identify a problem, consult with a coworker, act on, what you've been advised to do, and then document every single thing that happened. That's what you should be doing. So deontology is like a fun and interesting thing to read about, but at the end of the day, it don't matter. You got to do what ethics says. So that's what I'll say about that. But I would highly recommend looking up some of those philosophical things. My minor was in philosophy, and I'm a real serious nerd about it. So thank you. Okay, I swear we're very, very close. I think there's like 4 slides left. How to obtain consultation. There's a few ways. They're all listed on the slide. You are welcome to pause them and write them down, or I'm sure you can literally just Google like I'm a therapist. How do I obtain consultation? NASW, you would need a membership for. The membership does have more than just consultation options, but I will say, just so that it's said, if you are a therapist and you don't have a social work license, so like LMFT or something, you can't use the NASW. So sorry, choose one of the other options. And then I like the idea of consulting with your local university social work department. They are obviously going to have people who teach ethics, so they're going to know a lot of this stuff. And then when you are consulting, making sure you're maintaining confidentiality nonetheless, like you are not revealing client information that's not absolutely 100% necessary and being revealed for the 100% appropriate reason. That don't like you can probably consult about a client's issue without using nearly any identifying information. Like you may have to talk about something, but the other person probably doesn't need to be able to identify them. And then humility, right? If you're consulting and you think you know the answer and you're just going to double check and then someone says, no, that's wrong, don't do that. Don't, right? Sometimes you may have to report something that you've done. Maybe you'll consult and they'll say, you messed that up. That was no good. You have to report yourself at that point, and that sucks, but it's also the right thing to do. And that's what this whole presentation is about, is the right thing to do. So, and then when you actually do need to report, you need to report correctly. The reason I picked two people gossiping on here is there are two ways that you might be reporting something that's not like truly reporting. One would be gossip. I wrote this down so that I could say it exactly how I want to say it. If you're sharing information with multiple people in an informal way, you're gossiping, okay? If you're sharing your knowledge of an ethical violation with anyone who's not in the chain of command, which I'll explain in a second, you're gossiping. So the chain of command is, so now you're at the very bottom of that chain. The colleague, we talked about this, you reach out to the colleague first, right? So you, the colleague, if they don't do anything, the colleague's supervisor. If they don't do anything, then you go whoever's above that, which in a small enough clinic might be like an owner. And then if they don't do anything, then going to like a licensing board, so something like Doppel. So if you're telling anyone outside of that chain of command, you're gossiping, like period. And you may not realize you're doing it. I do think it's kind of like a human tendency, but it's definitely not reporting, and it's definitely not being done in good faith. And then there is the bad faith reporting, which basically is like you're either skipping levels in the chain of command because you want to make a big deal out of it, or you're over reporting something or exaggerating something in some way because you're hoping to see them get in trouble. So like you are reporting, but it's not for good reason. So gossip is like you're telling the wrong people for the wrong reason. Bad faith reporting is like you're telling the right people, but still for the wrong reason. And then again, when you're reporting, to the best of your ability, like maintain the client's confidentiality nonetheless, and make sure if you think that someone's going to retaliate, that you just skip that chain of command. So if you want to go to the colleague, but you're like, yeah, they're kind of the type to report or to retaliate, you can skip them. If you think like if your boss is like fully implicated in something, you can skip all the way to Doppel if you need to. It's but that's not bad faith reporting. Like bad faith reporting would be skipping them just because you just want to cause waves. Don't do that. I think this is like the third to last slide maybe. So who do you report? You report everyone. Not exactly, but I think it's hard to know. It's not hard to know, it's obvious information, but it's hard to actually take that move and do the reporting because looking at the slide here, this is a Venn diagram. Like your coworkers become your friends. Your employer sort of becomes your friend. Your stakeholders really become your friend. You guys have like similar values. You guys are on a similar mission. It's like absolutely normal for those relationships to develop into something kind of like friendships. But you really, I already said this earlier, but you really have to make sure that those friendships don't supersede ethics. If your BFF is your boss and they are committing fraud, you have to report that. Also, just to make sure that it's said, this would also be like friends of yours outside of your clinic. So if you're like still friends with people from school or people from a previous clinic, they are still like people that you have to report if they're acting unethically. This is not limited to just within your clinic. Um, let's see. I just want to make sure I got everything on this one. Um, yeah. So you have anyone, right? You have to report anyone who is a therapist, social worker, any of those kind of, similar licenses, even if you don't want to. That's kind of the bottom line. And then second to last slide, if I haven't said enough already, you can still find more information. There, I will say there is actually like a lot more that could be said about all of this. I ended up having to really skip through the end of this. I think I still got all of the really important information, so I feel fine about it, but there is like a lot more that can be said. And I'm gonna try to see about doing a part 2 to this where I go in a little more deeply, but I don't have any promises on that yet. That's a completely separate issue in my life. But if you want more information before such a time that I maybe do that, the Code of Ethics is where I gathered most of this information. Socialworkers.org, then click About, click Ethics, and then click Code of Ethics. You can purchase it as of January 17th, 2026. It was $6.99. One can assume that within 5 to 10 business days, it'll be $30. That's just the economy right now. But you could purchase it if you want like an actual copy of it. You can print it also, which is free. That's the link, socialworkers.org. You can't click it because this is a video, so it's kind of useless for me to include that. But that's where you can get more information. There's also, if you have like other kinds of licenses, like you could look up like LMFT Code of Ethics. But I will say that they're basically all the same. Like I had to look up Utah statute for making this slideshow. And it's considered like similar license. So you guys do have like generally the same code of ethics. I would guess that I know that there's different stuff with other licenses where like some of them can accept like trade of services, but definitely check with your employer because I know for sure my employer doesn't allow that, even if your license allows it. So yeah, unless you have like permission from your employer, don't accept trades of services. But it is a good example of like some ethical codes are different based on your license type. So hello, this is the end of this slide. This is also, I didn't even realize it changed slides. This is the end of this slide. Thank you.